Under the Deodars. The education of Otis Year. I. In the pleasant orchard closes. God bless all our gains, say we. But may God bless all our losses. Better suits with our degree. The Lost Bower. This is the history of a failure, but the woman who failed said that it might be an instructive tale to put into print for the benefit of the younger generation. The younger generation does not want instruction, being perfectly willing to instruct. If anyone will listen to it, none. The less here begins the story, where every right-minded story should begin, that is to say at Simla, where all things begin, and many come to an evil end. The mistake was due to a very clever woman making a blunder, and not retrieving it. Men are licensed to stumble, but a clever woman's mistake is outside the regular course of nature and providence, since all good people know that a woman is the only infallible thing in this world, except government paper of the 79 issue bearing interest at 4.5%, yet we have to remember that 6 consecutive days of rehearsing the leading part of the fallen angel at the New Gaiety Theatre, where the plaster is not yet properly dry, might have brought about an unhingement of spirits, which again might have led to eccentricities. Mrs. Hawksby came to the foundry to tiffin with Mrs. Mallow, her one bosom friend, for she was in no sense a woman's woman, and it was a woman's tiffin, the door shut to all the world, and they both talked chiffons, which is French for mysteries. "I've enjoyed an interval of sanity," Mrs. Hawksby announced after tiffin was over, and the two were comfortably settled in the little reading room that opened out of Mrs. Mallow's bedroom. "My dear girl, what has he done?" said Mrs. Mallow sweetly. "It is noticeable that ladies of a certain age call each other dear girl, just as commissioners of 28 years, standing address their equals in the civil list as my boy. There's no he in the case. Who am I that an imaginary man should be always credited to me? Am I an Apache? No, dear, but somebody's scalp is generally drying at your wigwam door, soaking rather." This was an allusion to the Holly boy, who was in the habit of riding all across Simla in the rains to call on Mrs. Hawksby. That lady laughed. "For my sins, the aide at Tyrconnell last night told me off to the Mussock HSH. Don't laugh, one of my most devoted admirers. When the duff came, someone really ought to teach them to make puddings at Tyrconnell. The Mussock was at liberty to attend to me." "Sweet soul, I know his appetite," said Mrs. Mallow. Did he begin his wooing?" "By a special mercy of Providence, no, he explained his importance. As a pillar of the empire, I didn't laugh." "Lucy, I don't believe you." "Ask Captain Sanger, he was on the other side." "Well, as I was saying, the Mussock dilated." "I think I can see him doing it," said Mrs. Mallow, pensively scratching her fox terrier's ears. "I was properly impressed, most properly. I yawned openly, strict supervision. And play them off one against the other," said the Mussock, shoveling down his ice. "By Tyrreenfuls, I assure you that Mrs. Hawksby is the secret of our government." Mrs. Mallow laughed long and merrily. "And what did you say?" "Did you ever know me at loss for an answer? Yet I said so. I have observed in my dealings with you," the Mussock swelled with pride. "He is coming to call on me tomorrow. The Holly boy is coming too. Strict supervision, and play them off one against the other, that Mrs. Hawksby is the secret of our government. And I dare say, if we could get to the Mussock's heart, we should find that he considers himself a man of the world. As he is of the other two things. I like the Mussock, and I won't have you call him names. He amuses me. He has reformed you too, by what appears explain the interval of sanity, and hit him on the nose with the paper cutter. Please, that dog is too fond of sugar. Do you take milk in yours?" "No thanks, Polly, I'm wearied of this life, it's hull." "Turn religious, then. I always said that Rome would be your fate. Only exchanging half a dozen attaches in red for one in black, and if I fasted the wrinkles would come, and never go. Has it ever struck you, dear, that I am getting old?" "Thanks for your courtesy, ill return it ye's. We are both not exactly, how shall I put it? What we have been, I feel it in my bones, as Mrs. Crossley says. Polly, I've wasted my life." "As how?" "Never mind how I feel it. I want to be a power before I die." "Be a power, then you've wits enough for anything and beauty." Mrs. Hawksby pointed a teaspoon straight at her hostess. "Polly, if you heap compliments on me like this, I shall cease to believe that you're a woman. Tell me how I am to be a power." "Inform the Mussock that he is the most fascinating and slimmest man in Asia, and he'll tell you anything and everything you please." "Bother the Mussock, I mean an intellectual power, not a gasper. Polly, I am going to start a salon." Mrs. Mallow turned lazily on the sofa, and rested her head on her hand. Hear the words of the preacher, the son of Baruch, she said. Will you talk sensibly? I will, dear, for I see that you are going to make a mistake. I never made a mistake in my life, at least never one that I couldn't explain away afterwards. Going to make a mistake, went on Mrs. Mallow composedly. It is impossible to start a salon in Simla. A bar would be much more to the point. Perhaps, but why it seems so easy. Just what makes it so difficult? How many clever women are there in Simla? Myself and yourself, said Mrs. Hawksby, without a moment's hesitation. Modest woman, Mrs. Fearden would thank you for that. And how many clever men? Oh, hundreds, said Mrs. Hawksby vaguely. What a fatal blunder, not one. They are all bespoke by the government. Take my husband, for instance. Jack was a clever man. Though I say so, who shouldn't? Government has eaten him up, all his ideas and powers of conversation. He really used to be a good talker, even to his wife in the old days, are taken from him by this kitchen sink of a government. That's the case with every man up here who is at work. I don't suppose a Russian convict under the knout is able to amuse the rest of his gang, and all our menfolk here are gilded convicts. But there are scores. I know what you're going to say, scores of idle men up on leave, I admit it. But they are all of two objectionable sets, the civilian who'd be delightful if he had the military man's knowledge of the world and style, and the military man who'd be adorable if he had the civilian's culture. Detestable word, have civilians culture. I never studied the breed deeply. Don't make fun of Jack's service. Yes, they're like the teapoys in the lacquer bazaar, good material, but not polished. They can't help themselves, poor dears. A civilian only begins to be tolerable after he has knocked about the world for 15 years. And a military man, when he has had the same amount of service, the young of both species are horrible. You would have scores of them in your salon. I would not, said Mrs. Hawksby fiercely. I would tell the bearer to Darwaza, ban them, id put their own colonels and commissioners at the door to turn them away. Id give them to the Topsham girl to play with. The Topsham girl would be grateful for the gift, but to go back to the salon, allowing that you had gathered all your men and women together, what would you do with them? Make them talk. They would all with one accord begin to flirt. Your salon would become a glorified Pelitis, a scandal point by lamplight. There's a certain amount of wisdom in that view. There's all the wisdom in the world in it. Surely 12 Simla seasons ought to have taught you that you can't focus anything in India, and a salon to be any good at all must be permanent in 2 seasons. Your roomful would be scattered all over Asia. We are only little bits of dirt on the hillsides here one day, and blown down the road the next. We have lost the art of talking. At least our men have no cohesion. George Eliot in the flesh, interpolated Mrs. Hawksby wickedly. And collectively, my dear scoffer, we men and women alike have no influence. Come into the veranda and look at them all. The two looked down on the now rapidly filling road, for all Simla was abroad to steal a stroll between a shower and a fog. How do you propose to fix that river? Look, there's the mussuk head of goodness knows what he is, a power in the land, though he does eat like a costermonger. There's Colonel Blown and General Grutcher, and Sir Dugald Delane, and Sir Henry Houghton, and Mr. Gelaletti, all heads of departments and all powerful. And all my fervent admirers, said Mrs. Hawksby, piously. Sir Henry Houghton raves about me, but go on. One by one, these men are worth something collectively. They're just a mob of Anglo-Indians. Who cares for what Anglo-Indians say? Your salon want weld the departments together and make you mistress of India, dear. And these creatures want talk administrative shop in a crowd your salon, because they are so afraid of the men in the lower ranks overhearing it. They have forgotten what of literature and art they ever knew, and the women can't talk about anything except the last gymkhana or the sins of their last nurse. I was calling on Mrs. Derwells this morning. You admit that they can talk to the subalterns, though, and the subalterns can talk to them. Your salon would suit their views admirably if you respected the religious prejudices of the country and provided plenty of kala-juggas. Plenty of kala-juggas, oh my poor little idea, kala-juggas in a salon. But who made you so awfully clever? Perhaps I've tried myself, or perhaps I know a woman who has. I have preached and expounded the whole matter, and the conclusion thereof. You needn't go on his vanity, Polly. I thank you. These vermin. Mrs. Hawksby waved her hand from the veranda to 2 men in the crowd below who had raised their hats to her. These vermin shall not rejoice in a new scandal point, or an extra Pelitis. I will abandon the notion of a salon. It did seem so tempting, though. But what shall I do? I must do something. Why are not Abana and Farpar? Jack has made you nearly as bad as himself. I want to, of course. I am tired of everything, and everybody, from a moonlight picnic at Seepy to the blandishments of the mussuk. Yes, that comes too sooner or later. Have you nerve enough to make your bow yet? Mrs. Hawksby's mouth shut grimly, then she laughed. I think I see myself doing it. Big pink placards on the mall. Mrs. Hawksby, positively her last appearance on any stage. This is to give notice. No more dances, no more rides, no more luncheons, no more theatricals, with supper to follow, no more sparring with one's dearest friend, no more fencing with an inconvenient man who hasn't wit enough to clothe what he's pleased to call his sentiments in passable speech, no more parading of the mussuk, while Mrs. Tarkas calls all-round Simla spreading horrible stories about me, no more of anything that is thoroughly wearying, abominable and detestable, but all the same makes life worth the having. Yes, I see it all. Don't interrupt, Polly. I am inspired. A mauve and white striped cloud round my excellent shoulders, a seat in the 5th row of the Gaiety, and both horses sold delightful vision. A comfortable armchair situated in 3 different drafts at every ballroom, and nice large sensible shoes for all the couples to stumble over as they go into the veranda. Then at supper, can't you imagine the scene? The greedy mob gone away, reluctant subaltern, pink all over like a newly powdered baby. They really ought to tan subalterns before they are exported. Polly, sent back by the hostess to do his duty, slouches up to me across the room, tugging at a glove 2 sizes too large for him. I hate a man who wears gloves like overcoats, and trying to look as if he'd thought of it from the first. May I have the pleasure of talking you nt supper? Then I get up with a hungry smile just like this. Lucy, how can you be so absurd? And sweep out on his arm. So after supper, I shall go away early, you know, because I shall be afraid of catching cold. No one will look for my rickshaw. Mine, so please you, I shall stand always with that mauve and white cloud over my head, while the wet soaks into my dear old venerable feet. And Tom swears and shouts for the Memsahib's Gary, then home to bed at 11:30. Truly excellent life. Helped out by the visits of the Padre, just fresh from burying somebody down below there. She pointed through the pines toward the cemetery, and continued with vigorous dramatic gesture. Listen, I see it all down, even to the stays. Such stays, 6/8 a pair, Polly, with red flannel, or list. Is it that they put into the tops of those fearful things? I can draw you a picture of them. Lucy, for heaven's sake, don't go waving your arms about in that idiotic manner. Recollect, everyone can see you from the mall. Let them see. They'll think I am rehearsing for the fallen angel. Look, there's the mussuk, how badly he rides there. She blew a kiss to the venerable Indian administrator with infinite grace. Now, she continued, hell be chaffed about that at the club in the delicate manner those brutes of men affect, and the Holly boy will tell me all about it, softening the details for fear of shocking me. That boy is too good to live, Polly. I've serious thoughts of recommending him to throw up his commission and go into the church. In his present frame of mind, he would obey me. Happy child. Never again, said Mrs. Mallow, with an affectation of indignation, shall you tiffin here. Lucindy, your behavior is scandalous. All your fault, retorted Mrs. Hawksby, for suggesting such a thing as my abdication. No jamise. Never. I will act, dance, ride, frivol, talk, scandal, dine out, and appropriate the legitimate captives of any woman I choose, until I drrrop or a better woman than I puts me to shame before all Simla, and its dust and ashes in my mouth, while I am doing it. She swept into the drawing-room. Mrs. Mallow followed and put an arm round her waist. I am not, said Mrs. Hawksby, defiantly rummaging for her handkerchief. I've been dining out the last 10 nights, and rehearsing in the afternoon. You'd be tired yourself. It's only because I am tired. Mrs. Mallow did not offer Mrs. Hawksby any pity or ask her to lie down, but gave her another cup of tea, and went on with the talk. I've been through that too, dear, she said. I remember, said Mrs. Hawksby, a gleam of fun on her face, in '84. Wasn't it? You went out a great deal less next season. Mrs. Mallow smiled in a superior and sphinx-like fashion. I became an influence, said she. Good gracious, child, you didn't join the Theosophists and kiss Buddha's big toe, did you? I tried to get into their set once, but they cast me out for a skeptic, without a chance of improving my poor little mind too. No, I didn't, Theosophilander, Jack says. Never mind, Jack, what a husband says is known before. What did you do? I made a lasting impression. So have I, for 4 months, but that didn't console me in the least. I hated the man. Will you stop smiling in that inscrutable way, and tell me what you mean. Mrs. Mallow told. And you mean to say that it is absolutely platonic on both sides? Absolutely, or I should never have taken it up. And his last promotion was due to you. Mrs. Mallow nodded. And you warned him against the Topsham girl. Another nod. And told him of Sir Dugald Delane's private memo about him. A third nod. Why? What a question to ask a woman, because it amused me at first. I am proud of my property now. If I live he shall continue to be successful, yes. I will put him upon the straight road to knighthood, and everything else that a man values the rest depends upon himself. Polly, you are a most extraordinary woman. Not in the least, I am concentrated, that's all. You diffuse yourself, dear. And though all Simla knows your skill in managing a team. Can't you choose a prettier word? Team of half a dozen from the Mussock to the Holly boy, you gain nothing by it, not even amusement. And you? Try my recipe, take a man, not a boy mind, but an almost mature unattached man. And be his guide, philosopher and friend. Yowl, find it the most interesting occupation, that you ever embarked on. It can be done, you needn't look like that because I've done it. There's an element of risk about it that makes the notion attractive. Ill get such a man, and say to him, now understand, that there must be no flirtation, do exactly what I tell you, profit by my instruction and counsels, and all will yet be well. Is that the idea? More or less, said Mrs. Mallow with an unfathomable smile, but be sure he understands. Roman 2. Dribble dribble, trickle trickle. What a lot of raw dust. My dollies had an accident. And out came all the sawdust. Nursery rhyme. So Mrs. Hawksby in the foundry, which overlooks Simla Mall, sat at the feet of Mrs. Mallow, and gathered wisdom. The end of the conference was the great idea upon which Mrs. Hawksby so plumed herself. I warn you, said Mrs. Mallow, beginning to repent of her suggestion, that the matter is not half so easy as it looks. Any woman, even the Topsham girl, can catch a man, but very, very few know how to manage him when caught. My child, was the answer. I've been a female since Simon Stylites, looking down upon men for these years past. Ask the Mussock whether I can manage them. Mrs. Hawksby departed, humming Ill go to him, and say to him in manner most ironical. Mrs. Mallow laughed to herself. Then she grew suddenly sober. I wonder whether I've done well in advising that amusement. Lucy's a clever woman, but a thought too careless. A week later the two met at a Monday pop. Well, said Mrs. Mallow. I've caught him, said Mrs. Hawksby. Her eyes were dancing with merriment. Who is it, mad woman? I am sorry I ever spoke to you about it. Look between the pillars in the third row, fourth from the end. You can see his face. Now look. Otis Year, of all the improbable and impossible people, I don't believe you. HSH, wait till Mrs. Tarkas begins murdering Milton Wellings, and I'll tell you all about it. SSSS. That woman's voice always reminds me of an underground train coming into Earl's Court with the brakes on. Now listen, it is really Otis Year. So I see, but does it follow that he is your property? He is by right of trove. I found him lonely and unbefriended the very next night after our talk at the Dugald Delane's Burracana. I liked his eyes, and I talked to him. Next day he called. Next day we went for a ride together. And today he's tied to my ritual's hand and foot. You'll see, when the concert's over he doesn't know I am here yet. Thank goodness you haven't chosen a boy. What are you going to do with him? Assuming that you've got him. Assuming indeed, does a woman? Do I ever make a mistake in that sort of thing? First, Mrs. Hawksby ticked off the items ostentatiously on her little gloved fingers. First, my dear, I shall dress him properly. At present his raiment is a disgrace, and he wears a dress shirt like a crumpled sheet of the Pioneer. Secondly, after I have made him presentable, I shall form his manners. His morals are above reproach. You seem to have discovered a great deal about him, considering the shortness of your acquaintance. Surely you ought to know that the first proof a man gives of his interest in a woman is by talking to her about his own sweet self. If the woman listens without yawning, he begins to like her. If she flatters the animal's vanity, he ends by adoring her. In some cases. Never mind the exceptions, I know which one you are thinking of. Thirdly, and lastly, after he is polished and made pretty, I shall, as you said, be his guide, philosopher, and friend. And he shall become a success, as great a success as your friend. I always wondered how that man got on. Did the Mussock come to you with the civil list, and dropping on one knee, no, two knees, Law Gibbon, hand it to you, and say, adorable angel, choose your friend's appointment? Lucy, your long experiences of the military department have demoralized you. One doesn't do that sort of thing on the civil side. No disrespect meant to Jack's service, my dear. I only asked for information. Give me 3 months, and see what changes I shall work in my prey. Go your own way, since you must, but I am sorry that I was weak enough to suggest the amusement. I am all discretion, and may be trusted to an infinite extent, quoted Mrs. Hawksby from The Fallen Angel, and the conversation ceased with Mrs. Tarkas' last long-drawn war-whoop. Her bitterest enemies, and she had many, could hardly accuse Mrs. Hawksby of wasting her time. Otis Year was one of those wandering dumb characters, foredoomed through life, to be nobody's property. 10 years in Her Majesty's Bengal civil service, spent for the most part in undesirable districts, had given him little to be proud of, and nothing to bring confidence. Old enough to have lost the first fine careless rapture that showers on the immature stunt imaginary commissionerships and stars, and sends him into the collar with coltish earnestness, and abandoned too young to be yet able to look back upon the progress he had made and thank Providence that under the conditions of the day he had come even so far. He stood upon the dead center of his career, and when a man stands still, he feels the slightest impulse from without. Fortune had ruled that Otis Year should be for the first part of his service one of the rank and file who are ground up in the wheels of the administration, losing heart and soul and mind and strength in the process, until steam replaces manual power in the working of the empire. There must always be this percentage, must always be the men who are used up, expended in the mere mechanical routine, for these promotion is far off, and the mill grind of every day very instant. The secretariats know them only by name. They are not the picked men of the districts, with divisions and collectorates awaiting them. They are simply the rank and file, the food for fever sharing with the riot, and the plowbullock, the honor of being the plinth on which the state rests. The older ones have lost their aspirations, the younger are putting theirs aside with a sigh. Both learn to endure patiently until the end of the day. 12 years in the rank and file, men say, will sap the hearts of the bravest and dull the wits of the most keen. Out of this life Otis Year had fled for a few months, drifting in the hope of a little masculine society into Simla. When his leave was over, he would return to his swampy, sour-green, undermanned Bengal district, to the native assistant, the native doctor, the native magistrate, the steaming, sweltering station, the ill-kempt city, and the undisguised insolence of the municipality that babbled away the lives of men. Life was cheap. However, the soil spawned humanity as it bred frogs in the rains, and the gap of the sickness of one season was filled to overflowing by the fecundity of the next. Otis was unfeignedly thankful to lay down his work for a little while and escape from the seething, whining, weakly hive, impotent to help itself, but strong in its power to cripple, thwart, and annoy the sunken-kneed man who, by official irony, was said to be in charge of it. I knew there were women dowdies in Bengal. They come up here sometimes, but I didn't know that there were men dowds too. Then for the first time it occurred to Otis Year that his clothes wore rather the mark of the ages. It will be seen that his friendship with Mrs. Hawksby had made great strides. As that lady truthfully says, a man is never so happy as when he is talking about himself. From Otis Year's lips Mrs. Hawksby before long learned everything that she wished to know about the subject of her experiment, learned what manner of life he had led in what she vaguely called those awful cholera districts. Learned too, but this knowledge came later, what manner of life he had purposed to lead, and what dreams he had dreamed in the year of grace, 77, before the reality had knocked the heart out of him. Very pleasant are the shady bridle paths round Prospect Hill for the telling of such confidences. Not yet, said Mrs. Hawksby to Mrs. Milieu, not yet. I must wait until the man is properly dressed. At least, great heavens, is it possible that he doesn't know what an honor it is to be taken up by me? Mrs. Hawksby did not reckon false modesty as one of her failings. Always with Mrs. Hawksby, murmured Mrs. Mallow, with her sweetest smile, to Otis, oh, you men here are our Punjabis growling, because you've monopolized the nicest woman in Simla. They'll tear you to pieces on the mall some day, Mr. Mrs. Mallow rattled downhill, having satisfied herself, by a glance through the fringe of her sunshade, of the effect of her words. The shot went home of a surety. Otis Year was somebody in this bewildering whirl of Simla, had monopolized the nicest woman in it, and the Punjabis were growling. The notion justified a mild glow of vanity. He had never looked upon his acquaintance with Mrs. Hawksby as a matter for general interest. The knowledge of envy was a pleasant feeling to the man of no account. It was intensified later in the day, when a luncher at the club said spitefully, well, for a debilitated ditcher year you are going it. Hasn't any kind friend told you that she's the most dangerous woman in Simla? Year chuckled and passed out. When would his new clothes be ready? He descended into the mall to inquire. And Mrs. Hawksby, coming over the church ridge in her rickshaw, looked down upon him. Approvingly, he's learning to carry himself, as if he were a man instead of a piece of furniture. And she screwed up her eyes to see the better through the sunlight. He is a man. When he holds himself like that, oh blessed conceit, what should we be without you? With the new clothes came a new stock of self-confidence. Otis Year discovered that he could enter a room without breaking into a gentle perspiration, could cross one even to talk to Mrs. Hawksby, as though rooms were meant to be crossed. He was for the first time in 9 years proud of himself, and contented with his life, satisfied with his new clothes, and rejoicing in the friendship of Mrs. Hawksby. Conceit is what the poor fellow wants, she said in confidence to Mrs. Mallow. I believe they must use civilians to plough the fields within Lower Bengal. You see, I have to begin from the very beginning, haven't I? But you'll admit, want you dear, that he is immensely improved since I took him in hand. Only give me a little more time, and he won't know himself. Indeed, Year was rapidly beginning to forget what he had been one of his own rank, and File put the matter brutally when he asked Year in reference to nothing. And who has been making you a member of council lately? You carry the side of half a dozen of 'em. I'm awfully sorry, I didn't mean it, you know, said Year apologetically. There'll be no holding you, continued the old stager. Grimly climb down, Otis, climb down, and get all that beastly affectation knocked out of you. With fever 3,000 a month wouldn't support it. Year repeated the incident to Mrs. Hawksby. He had come to look upon her as his mother confessor. And you apologized, she said. Oh shame, I hate a man who apologizes. Never apologize for what your friend called side. Never. It's a man's business to be insolent and overbearing. Until he meets with a stronger. Now, you bad boy, listen to me. Simply and straightforwardly, as the rickshaw loitered round, Jacko, Mrs. Hawksby preached to Otis Year the great gospel of conceit, illustrating it with living pictures encountered during their Sunday afternoon stroll. Good gracious, she ended with the personal argument. You'll apologize next for being my attaché. Never, said Otis Year. That's another thing altogether. I shall always be. What's coming, thought Mrs. Hawksby. Proud of that, said Otis. Safe for the present, she said to herself. But I'm afraid I have grown conceited like Jeshurun, you know. When he waxed fat, then he kicked. It's the having no worry on one's mind, and the hill air, I suppose. Hill air indeed, said Mrs. Hawksby to herself. He'd have been hiding in the club till the last day of his leave if I hadn't discovered him, and aloud. Why shouldn't you be? You have every right to. I wise. Oh, hundreds of things. I am not going to waste this lovely afternoon by explaining, but I know you have. What was that heap of manuscript you showed me about the grammar of the Aboriginal? What's their names? Gull's a piece of nonsense. I've far too much work to do to bother over Gull's now. You should see my district. Come down with your husband some day and I'll show you round such a lovely place in the rains. A sheet of water with the railway embankment, and the snakes sticking out, and in the summer, green flies and green squash. The people would die of fear if you shook a dog whip at 'em. But they know you're forbidden to do that, so they conspire to make your life a burden to you. My district's worked by some man at Darjeeling on the strength of a native pleader's false reports. Oh, it's a heavenly place. Otis Year laughed bitterly. There's not the least necessity that you should stay in it. Why do you? Because I must. How am I to get out of it? How? In 150 ways. If there weren't so many people on the road, I'd like to box your ears. Ask, my dear boy, ask. Look, there is young Hexarley with 6 years' service, and half your talents. He asked for what he wanted, and he got it. See, down by the convent, there's MacArthurson, who has come to his present position by asking, sheer downright asking, after he had pushed himself out of the rank. And File, one man is as good as another in your service. Believe me, I've seen Simla for more seasons than I care to think about. Do you suppose men are chosen for appointments because of their special fitness beforehand? You have all passed a high test, what do you call it, in the beginning, and except for the few who have gone altogether to the bad, you can all work hard. Asking, does the rest call it cheek, call it insolence, call it anything you like? But ask men, argue. Yes, I know what men say, that a man by the mere audacity of his request must have some good in him. A weak man doesn't say give me this, and that he whines why haven't I been given this, and that if you were in the army I should say learn to spin plates or play a tambourine with your toes, as it is ask you belong to a service that ought to be able to command the Channel Fleet, or set a leg at 20 minutes' notice. And yet you hesitate over asking to escape from a squashy green district where you admit you are not master drop the Bengal government. Altogether, even Darjeeling is a little out of the way hole. I was there once, and the rents were extortionate. Assert yourself. Get the government of India to take you over. Try to get on the frontier, where every man has a grand chance if he can trust himself. Go somewhere, do something. You have twice the wits, and 3 times the presence of the men up here. And in Mrs. Hawksby paused for breath, then continued, and in any way you look at it, you ought to. You who could go so far. I don't know, said Year, rather taken aback by the unexpected eloquence. I haven't such a good opinion of myself. It was not strictly platonic, but it was policy. Mrs. Hawksby laid her hand lightly upon the ungloved paw that rested on the turned-back rickshaw hood, and looking the man full in the face, said tenderly, almost too tenderly, I believe in you. If you mistrust yourself, is that enough, my friend? It is enough, answered Otis, very solemnly. He was silent for a long time, redreaming the dreams that he had dreamed 8 years ago. But through them, all ran as sheet lightning through golden cloud the light of Mrs. Hawksby's violet eyes. Curious and impenetrable are the mazes of Simla life, the only existence in this desolate land, worth the living. Gradually it went abroad among men and women, in the pauses between dance play and gymkhana, that Otis Year, the man with the newly lit light of self-confidence in his eyes, had done something decent in the wilds. Whence he came, he had brought an erring municipality to reason, appropriated the funds on his own responsibility, and saved the lives of hundreds. He knew more about the Gulls than any living man, had a vast knowledge of the Aboriginal tribes, was, in spite of his juniority, the greatest authority on the Aboriginal Gulls. No one quite knew who or what the Gulls were, till the Mussuk, who had been calling on Mrs. Hawksby, and prided himself upon picking people's brains, explained they were a tribe of ferocious hillmen, somewhere near Sikkim, whose friendship even the great Indian Empire would find it worth her while to secure. Now we know that Otis Year had showed Mrs. Hawksby his MS notes of 6 years, standing on these same Gulls. He had told her too how sick and shaken with the fever their negligence had bred, crippled by the loss of his pet clerk, and savagely angry at the desolation in his charge. He had once damned the collective eyes of his intelligent local board for a set of haramzadas, which act of brutal and tyrannous oppression won him a reprimand royal from the Bengal government. But in the anecdote as amended for northern consumption, we find no record of this. Hence we are forced to conclude that Mrs. Hawksby edited his reminiscences before sowing them in idle ears, ready, as she well knew, to exaggerate good or evil, and Otis Year bore himself as befitted the hero of many tales. You can talk to me when you don't fall into a brown study. Talk now, and talk your brightest and best, said Mrs. Hawksby. Otis needed no spur. Look to a man who has the counsel of a woman of or above the world to back him. So long as he keeps his head, he can meet both sexes on equal ground, an advantage never intended by Providence, who fashioned man on one day and woman on another, in sign that neither should know more than a very little of the other's life. Such a man goes far, or the counsel being withdrawn collapses suddenly, while his world seeks the reason. Generaled by Mrs. Hawksby, who again had all Mrs. Mallow's wisdom at her disposal, proud of himself, and in the end believing in himself, because he was believed in. Otis Year stood ready for any fortune that might befall, certain that it would be good. He would fight for his own hand, and intended that this second struggle should lead to better issue than the first helpless surrender of the bewildered stunt. What might have happened, it is impossible to say. This lamentable thing befell, bred directly by a statement of Mrs. Hawksby that she would spend the next season in Darjeeling. Are you certain of that, said Otis Year. Quite, we're writing about a house now. Otis Year stopped dead, as Mrs. Hawksby put it in discussing the relapse with Mrs. Mallow. He has behaved, she said angrily, just like Captain Carrington's pony, only Otis is a donkey at the last. Gymkhana planted his forefeet and refused to go on another step. Polly, my man's going to disappoint me. What shall I do? As a rule, Mrs. Mallow does not approve of staring, but on this occasion she opened her eyes to the utmost. You have managed cleverly so far, she said. Speak to him and ask him what he means. I will at tonight's dance. No, oh, not at a dance, said Mrs. Mallow cautiously. Men are never themselves quite at dances. Better wait till tomorrow morning. Nonsense, if he's going to vert in this insane way there isn't a day to lose. Are you going? No. Then sit up for me. There's a dear. I shan't stay longer than supper under any circumstances. Mrs. Mallow waited through the evening, looking long and earnestly into the fire, and sometimes smiling to herself. Oh, the man's an idiot, a raving, positive idiot. I'm sorry I ever saw him. Mrs. Hawksby burst into Mrs. Mallow's house at midnight, almost in tears. What in the world has happened, said Mrs. Mallow, but her eyes showed that she had guessed an answer. Happened, everything has happened, he was there, I went to him, and said, now what does this nonsense mean? Don't laugh, dear, I can't bear it. But you know what I mean, I said then it was a square, and I sat it out with him, and wanted an explanation. And he said, oh, I haven't patience with such idiots, you know what I said about going to Darjeeling next year, it doesn't matter to me where I go, I'd have changed the station, and lost the rent to have saved this, he said in so many words, that he wasn't going to try to work up any more, because he would be shifted into a province away from Darjeeling, and his own district where these creatures are is within a day's journey. Said Mrs. Mallow, in a tone of one who has successfully tracked an obscure word through a large dictionary. Did you ever hear of anything so mad, so absurd? And he had the ball at his feet, he had only to kick it. I would have made him anything in the wide world, he could have gone to the world's end, I would have helped him. I made him, didn't I, Polly, didn't I create that man? Doesn't he owe everything to me? And to reward me just when everything was nicely arranged by this lunacy that spoilt everything. Very few men understand your devotion thoroughly. Oh, Polly, don't laugh at me, I give men up from this hour, I could have killed him then. And there, what right had this man, this thing I had picked out of his filthy paddofields to make love to me? He did that, did he? He Roman 999, I don't remember half he said. I was so angry, oh. But such a funny thing happened, I can't help laughing at it now, though I felt nearly ready to cry with rage. He raved. And I stormed, I'm afraid, we must have made an awful noise in our college. Jugga, protect my character, dear, if it's all over Simla by tomorrow. And then he bobbed forward in the middle of this insanity. I firmly believe the man's demented, and kissed me. Morals above reproach, purred Mrs. Mallow. So they are, it was the most absurd kiss, I don't believe he'd ever kissed a woman in his life before. I threw my head back, and it was a sort of slidey pecking dab, just on the end of the chin here. Mrs. Hawksby tapped her masculine little chin with her fan, then of course I was furiously angry, and told him that he was no gentleman, and I was sorry I'd ever met him. And so on, he was crushed so easily, then I couldn't be very angry, then I came away straight to you. Was this before or after supper? Oh, before, oceans before, isn't it perfectly disgusting? Let me think, I withhold judgment, till tomorrow morning brings counsel. But morning brought only a servant with a dainty bouquet of Annandale roses for Mrs. Hawksby to wear at the dance at Viceregal Lodge that night. He doesn't seem to be very penitent, said Mrs. Mallow. What's the billet due in the center? Mrs. Hawksby opened the neatly folded note. Another accomplishment that she had taught Otis, read it, and groaned tragically. Last wreck of a feeble intellect, poetry. Is it his own? Do you think, oh, that I ever built my hopes on such a maudlin idiot? No, it's a quotation from Mrs. Browning, and in view of the facts of the case, as Jack says, uncommonly well chosen. Listen. Sweet, thou hast trod on a heart. Past, there's a world full of men, and women as fair as thou art. Must do such things now and then. Thou only hast stepped unaware. Malice not one can impute. And why should a heart have been there? In the way of a fair woman's foot. I didn't, said Mrs. Hawksby, angrily, her eyes filling with tears. There was no malice at all. Oh, it's too vexatious. You've misunderstood the compliment, said Mrs. Mallow. He clears you completely. And I should think by this that he has cleared completely too. My experience of men is that when they begin to quote poetry, they are going to flit like swans singing before they die, you know. Polly, you take my sorrows in a most unfeeling way. Do I? Is it so terrible if he's hurt your vanity? I should say that you've done a certain amount of damage to his heart. Oh, you can never tell about a man, said Mrs. Hawksby. At the pit's mouth. Men say it was a stolen tide. The Lord that sent it, he knows all. But in mine ear will I abide the message that the bells let fall. And awesome bells they were to me. That in the dark rang Enderby. Jean and Jala. Once upon a time there was a man and his wife, and a tertium quid. All three were unwise, but the wife was the unwisest. The man should have looked after his wife, who should have avoided the tertium quid, who again should have married a wife of his own, after clean and open flirtations, to which nobody can possibly object round Jacko or Observatory Hill, when you see a young man with his pony in a white lather, and his hat on the back of his head, flying downhill at 15 miles an hour to meet a girl who will be properly surprised. To meet him, you naturally approve of that young man and wish him staff appointments, and take an interest in his welfare. And as the proper time comes, give them sugar tongs or side saddles according to your means and generosity. The tertium quid flew downhill on horseback, but it was to meet the man's wife, and when he flew uphill, it was for the same end. The man was in the plains earning money for his wife to spend on dresses and 400 rupee bracelets and inexpensive luxuries of that kind. He worked very hard and sent her a letter or a postcard daily. She also wrote to him daily and said that she was longing for him to come up to Simla. The tertium quid used to lean over her shoulder and laugh as she wrote the notes. Then the two would ride to the post office together. Now Simla is a strange place, and its customs are peculiar, nor is any man who has not spent at least 10 seasons there qualified to pass judgment on circumstantial evidence, which is the most untrustworthy in the courts for these reasons. And for others which need not appear, I decline to state positively whether there was anything irretrievably wrong in the relations between the man's wife and the tertium quid. If there was, and hereon you must form your own opinion, it was the man's wife's fault. She was kittenish in her manners, wearing generally an air of soft and fluffy innocence. But she was deadlily learned and evil-instructed. And now and again, when the mask dropped, men saw this, shuddered, and almost drew back. Men are occasionally particular, and the least particular men are always the most exacting. Simla is eccentric in its fashion of treating friendships. Certain attachments, which have set and crystallized through half a dozen seasons, acquire almost the sanctity of the marriage bond, and are revered as such. Again, certain attachments equally old, and to all appearance equally venerable, never seem to win any recognized official status, while a chance-sprung acquaintance, not 2 months born, steps into the place, which by right belongs to the senior. There is no law reducible to print which regulates these affairs. Some people have a gift which secures them infinite toleration, and others have not. The man's wife had not. If she looked over the garden wall, for instance, women taxed her with stealing their husbands. She complained pathetically that she was not allowed to choose her own friends when she put up her big white muff to her lips and gazed over it and under her eyebrows at you. As she said this thing, you felt that she had been infamously misjudged, and that all the other women's instincts were all wrong, which was absurd. She was not allowed to own the tertium quid in peace, and was so strangely constructed that she would not have enjoyed peace had she been so permitted. She preferred some semblance of intrigue to cloak even her most commonplace actions. After 2 months of riding, first round Jacko, then Elysium, then Summer Hill, then Observatory Hill, then under Jutog, and lastly up and down the cart road as far as the Tara Davy Gap in the dusk, she said to the tertium quid, "Frank, people say we are too much together, and people are so horrid." The tertium quid pulled his mustache and replied that horrid people were unworthy of the consideration of nice people. "But they have done more than talk, they have written to my hubby, I am sure of it," said the man's wife, and she pulled a letter from her husband out of her saddle pocket and gave it to the tertium quid. It was an honest letter written by an honest man, then stewing in the plains on 200 rupees a month, for he allowed his wife 850, and in a silk banyan and cotton trousers. It said that perhaps she had not thought of the unwisdom of allowing her name to be so generally coupled with the tertium quids, that she was too much of a child to understand the dangers of that sort of thing, that he, her husband, was the last man in the world to interfere jealously with her little amusements and interests, but that it would be better were she to drop the tertium quid quietly. And for her husband's sake, the letter was sweetened with many pretty little pet names, and it amused the tertium quid considerably. He and she laughed over it, so that you 50 yards away could see their shoulders shaking, while the horses slouched along side by side. Their conversation was not worth reporting. The upshot of it was that next day no one saw the man's wife and the tertium quid together. They had both gone down to the cemetery, which as a rule is only visited officially by the inhabitants of Simla. A Simla funeral, with the clergyman riding, the mourners riding, and the coffin creaking as it swings between the bearers, is one of the most depressing things on this earth, particularly when the procession passes under the wet dank dip beneath the Rockcliffe Hotel, where the sun is shut out, and all the hill streams are wailing and weeping together as they go down the valleys. Occasionally folk tend the graves, but we in India shift and are transferred so often that at the end of the second year, the dead have no friend, only acquaintances, who are far too busy amusing themselves up the hill, To attend to old partners, the idea of using a cemetery as a rendezvous is distinctly a feminine one. A man would have said simply, let people talk, well, go down the mall. A woman is made differently, especially if she be such a woman as the man's wife. She and the tertium quid enjoyed each other's society among the graves of men and women whom they had known and danced with aforetime. They used to take a big horse blanket and sit on the grass a little to the left of the lower end, where there is a dip in the ground, and where the occupied graves stop short, and the ready-made ones are not ready. Each well-regulated Indian cemetery keeps half a dozen graves permanently open for contingencies and incidental wear and tear in the hills. These are more usually baby's size, because children who come up weakened and sick from the plains often succumb to the effects of the rains in the hills, or get pneumonia from their ayahs, taking them through damp pine woods after the sun has set. In cantonments, of course, the man's size is more in request, these arrangements varying with the climate and population. One day when the man's wife and the tertium quid had just arrived in the cemetery, they saw some coolies breaking ground. They had marked out a full-size grave, and the tertium quid asked them whether any sahib was sick. They said that they did not know, but it was an order that they should dig a sahib's grave. Work away, said the tertium quid, and let's see how it's done. The coolies worked away, and the man's wife and the tertium quid watched and talked for a couple of hours, while the grave was being deepened. Then a coolie, taking the earth in baskets, as it was thrown up, jumped over the grave. That's queer, said the tertium quid. Where's my ulster? What's queer, said the man's wife. I have got a chill down my back, just as if a goose had walked over my grave. Why do you look at the thing? Then said the man's wife, let us go. The tertium quid stood at the head of the grave and stared without answering for a space. Then he said, dropping a pebble down, it is nasty and cold, horribly cold. I don't think I shall come to the cemetery any more. I don't think gravedigging is cheerful. The two talked and agreed that the cemetery was depressing. They also arranged for a ride next day out from the cemetery through the Mashabra tunnel up to Fagu and back, because all the world was going to a garden party at Viceregal Lodge, and all the people of Mashabra would go too. Coming up the cemetery road, the tertium quid's horse tried to bolt uphill, being tired with standing so long, and managed to strain a back sinew. I shall have to take the mare tomorrow, said the tertium quid, and she will stand nothing heavier than a snaffle. They made their arrangements to meet in the cemetery. After allowing all the Mashabra people time to pass into Simla, that night it rained heavily, and next day, when the tertium quid came to the trysting place, he saw that the new grave had a foot of water in it, the ground being a tough and sour clay. Jove, that looks beastly, said the tertium quid, fancy being boarded up, and dropped into that well. They then started off to Fagu, the mare playing with the snaffle, and picking her way as though she were shod with satin, and the sun shining divinely. The road below Mashabra to Fagu is officially styled the Himalayan Thibet Road. But in spite of its name, it is not much more than 6 feet wide in most places, and the drop into the valley below may be anything between 1 and 2,000 feet. Now we're going to Thibet, said the man's wife merrily, as the horses drew near to Fagu. She was riding on the cliffside. Into Thibet, said the tertium quid, ever so far from people who say horrid things and hubbies, who write stupid letters, with you to the end of the world. A coolie carrying a log of wood came round a corner, and the mare went wide to avoid him, 4 feet in, and haunches out, as a sensible mare should go. To the world's end, said the man's wife, and looked unspeakable things over her near shoulder at the tertium quid. He was smiling, but while she looked, the smile froze stiff as it were on his face, and changed to a nervous grin, the sort of grin men wear when they are not quite easy in their saddles. The mare seemed to be sinking by the stern, and her nostrils cracked, while she was trying to realize what was happening. The rain of the night before had rotted the dropside of the Himalayan Thibet Road, and it was giving way under her. What are you doing? Said the man's wife. The tertium quid gave no answer. He grinned nervously, and set his spurs into the mare, who rapped with her 4 feet on the road, and the struggle began. The man's wife screamed, "Oh, Frank, get off." But the tertium quid was glued to the saddle, his face blue and white, and he looked into the man's wife's eyes. Then the man's wife clutched at the mare's head, and caught her by the nose. Instead of the bridle, the brute threw up her head, and went down with a scream, the tertium quid upon her, and the nervous grin still set on his face. The man's wife heard the tinkle-tinkle of little stones, and loose earth falling off the roadway, and the sliding roar of the man and horse going down. Then everything was quiet, and she called on Frank to leave his mare and walk up, but Frank did not answer. He was underneath the mere 900 feet, below, spoiling a patch of Indian corn. As the revelers came back from Viceregal Lodge in the mist of the evening, they met a temporarily insane woman on a temporarily mad horse, swinging round the corners with her eyes and her mouth open, and her head, like the head of a Medusa. She was stopped by a man at the risk of his life, and taken out of the saddle a limp heap, and put on the bank to explain herself. This wasted 20 minutes, and then she was sent home in a lady's rickshaw, still with her mouth open, and her hands picking at her riding gloves. She was in bed through the following 3 days, which were rainy, so she missed attending the funeral of the tertium quid, who was lowered into 18 inches of water, instead of the 12 to which he had first objected. A wayside comedy. Because to every purpose there is time and judgment, therefore the misery of man is great upon him. Eccles Roman 8. Fate and the government of India have turned the station of Kashima into a prison, and because there is no help for the poor souls who are now lying there in torment, I write this story praying that the government of India may be moved to scatter the European population to the four winds. Kashima is bounded on all sides by the rock-dipped circle of the Deodars hills. In spring, it is ablaze with roses. In summer the roses die, and the hot winds blow from the hills. In autumn, the white mists from the Jay hills cover the place as with water, and in winter the frosts nip everything young and tender to earth level. There is but one view in Kashima, a stretch of perfectly flat pasture and plowland, running up to the grey-blue scrub of the Deodars hills. There are no amusements except snipe and tiger shooting, but the tigers have been long since hunted from their lairs in the rock caves, and the snipe only come once a year. Narkura, 143 miles by road, is the nearest station to Kashima, but Kashima never goes to Narkura, where there are at least 12 English people. It stays within the circle of the Deodars hills. All Kashima acquits Mrs. Vansithen of any intention to do harm, but all Kashima knows that she and she alone brought about their pain. Both the engineer Mrs. Bolt and Captain Curl know this. They are the English population of Kashima, if we accept Major Vansithen, who is of no importance whatever, and Mrs. Vansithen, who is the most important of all. You must remember, though you will not understand, that all laws weaken in a small and hidden community, where there is no public opinion. When a man is absolutely alone in a station, he runs a certain risk of falling into evil ways. This risk is multiplied by every addition to the population, up to 12. The juror number after that fear and consequent restraint begin, and human action becomes less grotesquely jerky. There was deep peace in Kashima, till Mrs. Vansithen arrived. She was a charming woman. Everyone said so everywhere, and she charmed everyone in spite of this, or perhaps because of this, since fate is so perverse. She cared only for one man, and he was Major Vansithen. Had she been plain or stupid, this matter would have been intelligible to Kashima, but she was a fair woman with very still gray eyes, the color of a lake just before the light of the sun touches it. No man who had seen those eyes could later on explain what fashion of woman she was to look upon. The eyes dazzled him. Her own sex said that she was not bad-looking, but spoilt by pretending to be so grave. And yet her gravity was natural. It was not her habit to smile. She merely went through life looking at those who passed, and the women objected while the men fell down and worshipped. She knows and is deeply sorry for the evil she has done to Kashima, but Major Vansithen cannot understand why Mrs. Bolt does not drop in to afternoon tea at least 3 times a week. When there are only 2 women in one station, they ought to see a great deal of each other, says Major Vansithen. Long and long before ever Mrs. Vansithen came out of those faraway places, where there is society and amusement, Curl had discovered that Mrs. Bolt was the one woman in the world for him, and you dare not blame them. Kashima was as out of the world as heaven or the other place, and the Deodars hills kept their secret well. Bolt had no concern in the matter. He was in camp for a fortnight at a time. He was a hard, heavy man, and neither Mrs. Bolt nor Curl pitied him. They had all Kashima and each other for their very, very own, and Kashima was the Garden of Eden in those days. When Bolt returned from his wanderings, he would slap Curl between the shoulders and call him old fellow, and the 3 would dine together. Kashima was happy then, when the judgment of God seemed almost as distant as Narkura, or the railway that ran down to the sea, but the government sent Major Vansithen to Kashima, and with him came his wife. The etiquette of Kashima is much the same as that of a desert island. When a stranger is cast away, there all hands go down to the shore to make him welcome. Kashima assembled at the masonry platform close to the Narkura road, and spread tea for the Vansithens. That ceremony was reckoned a formal call, and made them free of the station its rights and privileges. When the Vansithens settled down, they gave a tiny housewarming to all Kashima, and that made Kashima free of their house, according to the immemorial usage of the station. Then the rains came when no one could go into camp, and the Narkura road was washed away by the Kasan River, and in the cup-like pastures of Kashima, the cattle waded knee-deep. The clouds dropped down from the Dosiri hills and covered everything. At the end of the rains, Bolt's manner towards his wife changed and became demonstratively affectionate. They had been married 12 years. And the change startled Mrs. Bolt, who hated her husband with the hate of a woman who has met with nothing but kindness from her mate, and in the teeth of this kindness has done him a great wrong. Moreover, she had her own trouble to fight with her watch to keep over her own property curl for 2 months. The rains had hidden the Dosiri hills, and many other things besides. But when they lifted, they showed Mrs. Bolt that her man among men, her Ted, for she called him Ted in the old days when Bolt was out of earshot, was slipping the links of the allegiance. The Vansithen woman has taken him, Mrs. Bolt said to herself, and when Bolt was away wept over her belief in the face of the over-vehement blandishments of Ted's sorrow in Kashima, is as fortunate as love, because there is nothing to weaken it save the flight of time. Mrs. Bolt had never breathed her suspicion to Curl, because she was not certain, and her nature led her to be very certain, before she took steps in any direction. That is why she behaved, as she Roman 999 Bolt came into the house one evening, and leaned against the doorposts of the drawing-room chewing his mustache. Mrs. Bolt was putting some flowers into a vase. There is a pretense of civilization, even in Kashima. "Little woman," said Bolt quietly, "do you care for me?" "Immensely," said she, with a laugh. "Can you ask it?" "But I am serious," said Bolt. "Do you care for me?" Mrs. Bolt dropped the flowers and turned round quickly. "Do you want an honest answer?" "Yes, I've asked for it." Mrs. Bolt spoke in a low, even voice for 5 minutes very distinctly, that there might be no misunderstanding her meaning. When Samson broke the pillars of Gaza, he did a little thing, and one not to be compared to the deliberate pulling down of a woman's homestead about her own ears. There was no wise female friend to advise Mrs. Bolt, the singularly cautious wife, to hold her hand. She struck at Bolt's heart because her own was sick with suspicion of Curl, and worn out with the long strain of watching alone through the rains. There was no plan or purpose in her speaking. The sentences made themselves, and Bolt listened leaning against the doorpost with his hands in his pockets when all was over, and Mrs. Bolt began to breathe through her nose before breaking out into tears. He laughed and stared straight in front of him at the Dosiri hills. "Is that all?" he said. "Thanks, I only wanted to know you know." "What are you going to do?" said the woman between her sobs. "Do nothing. What should I do? Kill Curl, or send you home, or apply for leave to get a divorce? It's 2 days' trek into Narkura." He laughed again, and went on. "I'll tell you what you can do. You can ask Curl to dinner tomorrow, no, on Thursday. That will allow you time to pack, and you can bolt with him. I give you my word I won't follow." He took up his helmet and went out of the room, and Mrs. Bolt sat till the moonlight streaked the floor, thinking and thinking and thinking. She had done her best upon the spur of the moment to pull the house down, but it would not fall. Moreover, she could not understand her husband, and she was afraid then the folly of her useless truthfulness struck her, and she was ashamed to write to Curl saying, "I have gone mad, and told everything. My husband says that I am free to elope with you. Get a deck for Thursday, and we will fly after dinner." There was a cold-bloodedness about that procedure which did not appeal to her, so she sat still in her own house and thought. At dinner-time Bolt came back from his walk white and worn and haggard, and the woman was touched at his distress. As the evening wore on, she muttered some expression of sorrow, something approaching to contrition. Bolt came out of a brown study and said, "Oh, that I wasn't thinking about that. By the way, what does Curl say to the elopement?" "I haven't seen him," said Mrs. Bolt. "Good God, is that all?" But Bolt was not listening, and her sentence ended in a gulp. The next day brought no comfort to Mrs. Bolt, for Curl did not appear, and the new lift that she, in the 5 minutes' madness of the previous evening, had hoped to build out of the ruins of the old, seemed to be no nearer. Bolt ate his breakfast, advised her to see her Arab pony fed in the veranda, and went out. The morning wore through, and at midday the tension became unendurable. Mrs. Bolt could not cry. She had finished her crying in the night, and now she did not want to be left alone. Perhaps the Vansithen woman would talk to her. And since talking opens the heart, perhaps there might be some comfort to be found in her company. She was the only other woman in the station. In Kashima, there are no regular calling hours, everyone can drop in upon everyone else at pleasure. Mrs. Bolt put on a big Terai hat and walked across to the Vansithen's house to borrow last week's Queen the Two Compounds Touched, and instead of going up the drive she crossed through the gap in the cactus hedge, entering the house from the back. As she passed through the dining room, she heard behind the purdah that cloaked the drawing room door her husband's voice saying, "But on my soul and honor, I tell you she doesn't care for me. She told me so last night. I would have told you then, if Vansithen hadn't been with you. If it is for her sake that y'all have nothing to say to me, you can make your mind easy, it's Curl." "What?" said Mrs. Vansithen with a hysterical little laugh. "Curl. Oh, it can't be you two must have made some horrible mistake. Perhaps you lost your temper, or misunderstood, or something. Things can't be as wrong as you say." Mrs. Vansithen had shifted her defense to avoid the man's pleading, and was desperately trying to keep him to a side issue. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, "and it can be all put right again." Bolt laughed grimly. "It can't be Captain Curl. He told me that he had never taken the least interest in your wife, Mr. Bolt. Oh, do listen. He said he had not. He swore he had not," said Mrs. Vansithen. The purdah rustled, and the speech was cut short by the entry of a little thin woman with big rings round her eyes. Mrs. Vansithen stood up with a gasp. "What was that you said?" asked Mrs. Bolt. "Never mind that man. What did Ted say to you? What did he say to you? What did he say to you?" Mrs. Vansithen sat down helplessly on the sofa, overborne by the trouble of her questioner. "He said I can't remember exactly what he said, but I understood him to say, that is, but really, Mrs. Bolt, isn't it rather a strange question?" "Will you tell me what he said?" repeated Mrs. Bolt. "Even a tiger will fly before a bear robbed of her whelps." And Mrs. Vansithen was only an ordinarily good woman. She began in a sort of desperation. "Well, he said that the never cared for you at all, and of course, there was not the least reason why he should have, and that was all." "You said he swore he had not cared for me, was that true?" "Yes," said Mrs. Vansithen, very softly. Mrs. Bolt wavered for an instant where she stood, and then fell forward fainting. "What did I tell you?" said Bolt, as though the conversation had been unbroken. "You can see for yourself. She cares for him." The light began to break into his dull mind, and he went on, "And what was he saying to you?" But Mrs. Vansithen, with no heart for explanations or impassioned protestations, was kneeling over Mrs. Bolt. "Oh, you brute," she cried, "are all men like this? Help me to get her into my room. And her face is cut against the table. Oh, will you be quiet, and help me to carry her? I hate you. And I hate Captain Curl. Lift her up carefully, and now go away." Bolt carried his wife into Mrs. Vansithen's bedroom, and departed before the storm of that lady's wrath, and disgust impenitent, and burning with jealousy. Curl had been making love to Mrs. Vansithen, would do Vansithen as great a wrong as he had done Bolt, who caught himself considering whether Mrs. Vansithen would faint if she discovered that the man she loved had forsworn her. In the middle of these meditations, Curl came cantering along the road, and pulled up with a cheery "Good mornin', been mashing Mrs. Vansithen as usual, a bad thing for a sober married man, that what will Mrs. Bolt say?" Bolt raised his head and said slowly, "Oh, you liar." Curl's face changed. "What's that?" he asked quickly. "Nothing much," said Bolt. "Has my wife told you that you two are free to go off whenever you please? She has been good enough to explain the situation to me. You've been a true friend to me, Curl, old man, haven't you?" Curl groaned and tried to frame some sort of idiotic sentence about being willing to give satisfaction, but his interest in the woman was dead, had died out in the rains. And mentally, he was abusing her for her amazing indiscretion. It would have been so easy to have broken off the thing gently, and by degrees, and now he was saddled with Bolt's voice recalled him. "I don't think I should get any satisfaction from killing you, and I am pretty sure you'd get none from killing me." Then in a querulous tone, ludicrously disproportioned to his wrongs, Bolt added, "Seems rather a pity that you haven't the decency to keep to the woman now. You've got her, you've been a true friend to her too, haven't you?" Curl stared long and gravely. The situation was getting beyond him. "What do you mean?" he said. Bolt answered more to himself than the questioner. "My wife came over to Mrs. Vansithen's just now, and it seems you'd been telling Mrs. Vansithen that you'd never cared for Emma. I suppose you lied as usual. What had Mrs. Vansithen to do with you, or you with her? Try to speak the truth for once in a way." Curl took the double insult without wincing, and replied by another question. "Go on, what happened?" Emma fainted, said Bolt simply. But look here, what had you been saying to Mrs. Vansithen? Curl laughed. Mrs. Bolt had with unbridled tongue made havoc of his plans, and he could at least retaliate by hurting the man in whose eyes he was humiliated and shown dishonorable. Said to her, what does a man tell a lie like that for? I suppose I said pretty much what you've said, unless I am a good deal mistaken. I spoke the truth, said Bolt again, more to himself than Curl. Emma told me she hated me. She has no right in me. No, I suppose not. You're only her husband, Inno. And what did Mrs. Vansithen say, after you had laid your disengaged heart at her feet? Curl felt almost virtuous as he put the question. I don't think that matters, Bolt replied, and it doesn't concern you. But it does, I tell you, it does, began Curl shamelessly. The sentence was cut by a roar of laughter from Bolt's lips. Curl was silent for an instant, and then he too laughed long and loudly, rocking in his saddle. It was an unpleasant sound, the mirthless mirth of these men on the long white line of the Narkura road. There were no strangers in Kashima, or they might have thought that captivity within the Dosiri hills had driven half the European population mad. The laughter ended abruptly, and Curl was the first to speak. Well, what are you going to do? Bolt looked up the road, and at the hills. Nothing, said he quietly. What's the use? It's too ghastly. For anything, we must let the old life go on. I can only call you a hound and a liar. And I can't go on calling you names forever, besides which I don't feel that I am much better. We can't get out of this place. What is there to do? Curl looked round the rat pit of Kashima and made no reply. The injured husband took up the wondrous tale. Ride on and speak to Emma if you want to. God knows I don't care what you do. He walked forward and left Curl gazing blankly after him. Curl did not ride on either to see Mrs. Bolt or Mrs. Vansithen. He sat in his saddle and thought while his pony grazed by the roadside. The whir of approaching wheels roused him. Mrs. Vansithen was driving home, Mrs. Bolt white and wan with a cut on her forehead. Stop, please, said Mrs. Bolt. I want to speak to Ted. Mrs. Vansithen obeyed, but as Mrs. Bolt leaned forward, putting her hand upon the splashboard of the dogcart, Curl spoke. I've seen your husband, Mrs. Bolt. There was no necessity for any further explanation. The man's eyes were fixed not upon Mrs. Bolt, but her companion. Mrs. Bolt saw the look. Speak to him, she pleaded, turning to the woman at her side. Oh, speak to him, tell him what you told me just now, tell him you hate him, tell him you hate him. She bent forward and wept bitterly while the sighs impassive went forward to hold the horse. Mrs. Vansithen turned scarlet and dropped the reins. She wished to be no party to such unholy explanations. I've nothing to do with it, she began coldly, but Mrs. Bolt's sobs overcame her, and she addressed herself to the man. I don't know what I am to say, Captain Curl. I don't know what I can call you. I think you've behaved abominably. And she has cut her forehead terribly against the table. It doesn't hurt, it isn't anything, said Mrs. Bolt feebly. That doesn't matter, tell him what you told me, say you don't care for him. Oh, Ted, won't you believe her? Mrs. Bolt has made me understand that you were fond of her once, upon a time, went on Mrs. Vansithen. Well, said Curl brutally, it seems to me that Mrs. Bolt had better be fond of her own husband first. Stop, said Mrs. Vansithen, hear me first. I don't care, I don't want to know anything about you and Mrs. Bolt. But I want you to know that I hate you, that I think you are a cur, and that I'll never speak to you again. Oh, I don't dare to say what I think of you, you man. I want to speak to Ted, moaned Mrs. Bolt, but the dogcart rattled on, and Curl was left on the road shamed and boiling with wrath against Mrs. Bolt. He waited till Mrs. Vansithen was driving back to her own house, and she, being freed from the embarrassment of Mrs. Bolt's presence, learned for the second time her opinion of himself and his actions. In the evenings, it was the wont of all Kashima to meet at the platform on the Narkura road to drink tea and discuss the trivialities of the day. Major Vansithen and his wife found themselves alone at the gathering place for almost the first time in their remembrance, and the cheery Major, in the teeth of his wife's remarkably reasonable suggestion that the rest of the station might be sick, insisted upon driving round to the 2 bungalows and unearthing the population. Sitting in the twilight, said he with great indignation to the Bolts, That'll never do, hang it all, we're one family here, you must come out, and so must Curl, ill make him bring his banjo. So great is the power of honest simplicity, and a good digestion over guilty consciences, that all Kashima did turn out, even down to the banjo, and the Major embraced the company in one expansive grin. As he grinned, Mrs. Vansithen raised her eyes for an instant, and looked at all Kashima. Her meaning was clear. Major Vansithen would never know anything. He was to be the outsider in that happy family, whose cage was the Dosiri Hills. "You're singing villainously out of tune, Curl," said the major truthfully. "Pass me that banjo." And he sang in excruciating wise, till the stars came out, and all Kashima went to dinner. That was the beginning of the new life of Kashima, the life that Mrs. Bolt made when her tongue was loosened in the twilight. Mrs. Vansithen has never told the major, and since he insists upon keeping up a burdensome geniality, she has been compelled to break her vow of not speaking to Curl. This speech, which must of necessity preserve the semblance of politeness and interest, serves admirably to keep alight the flame of jealousy and dull hatred in Bolt's bosom, as it awakens the same passions in his wife's heart. Mrs. Bolt hates Mrs. Vansithen because she has taken Ted from her, and in some curious fashion hates her because Mrs. Vansithen, and here the wife's eyes see far more clearly than the husband's, detests Ted. And Ted, that gallant captain and honorable man, knows now that it is possible to hate a woman once loved to the verge of wishing to silence her forever with blows. Above all, is he shocked that Mrs. Bolt cannot see the error of her ways. Bolt and he go out tiger shooting together in all friendship. Bolt has put their relationship on a most satisfactory footing. "You're a blackguard," he says to Curl, "and I've lost any self-respect I may ever have had. But when you're with me, I can feel cert that you are not with Mrs. Vansithen, or making Emma miserable." Curl endures anything that Bolt may say to him. Sometimes they are away for 3 days together, and then the major insists upon his wife going over to sit with Mrs. Bolt. Although Mrs. Vansithen has repeatedly declared that she prefers her husband's company to any in the world from the way in which she clings to him, she would certainly seem to be speaking the truth. But of course, as the major says in A Little Station, we must all be friendly. The hill of illusion. What rendered vain their deep desire? A god their severance ruled, and bade between their shores to be the unplumbed salt estranging sea. Matthew Arnold. He tell your Japanese not to hurry so, dear, they forget I'm fresh from the plains. She sure proof that I have not been going out with anyone. Yes, they are an untrained crew. Where do we go? He as usual to the world's end, no Jacko. She have your pony led after you, then it's a long round. He, and for the last time, thank heaven. She, do you mean that still I didn't dare to write to you about it all these months? He mean it, I've been shaping my affairs to that end. Since autumn, what makes you speak as though it had occurred to you for the first time? She, I don't know, I've had long enough to think too. He, and you have changed your mind. She, know you ought to know that I am a miracle of constancy. What are your arrangements? He, ours, sweetheart, please. She, ours be it then, my poor boy. How the prickly heat has marked your forehead. Have you ever tried sulfate of copper in water? He, it'll go away in a day or two. Up here the arrangements are simple enough. Tonga, in the early morning reach Calcutta, at 12 Umballa, at 7 down straight by night train to Bombay, and then the steamer of the 21st for Rome. That's my idea. The continent, and Sweden a 10-week honeymoon. She, ssh, don't talk of it in that way. It makes me afraid. Guy, how long have we two been insane? He, 7 months and 14 days, I forget the odd hours exactly, but ill think. She, I only wanted to see if you remembered who are those two on the Blessington Road. He, Ebri and the Penner woman. What do they matter to us? Tell me everything that you've been doing and saying and thinking. She, doing little, saying less, and thinking a great deal. I've hardly been out at all. He, that was wrong of you. You haven't been moping. She, not very much. Can you wonder that I am disinclined for amusement? He, frankly, I do. Where was the difficulty? She, in this only, the more people I know, and the more I am known here, the wider spread will be the news of the crash when it comes. I don't like that. He, nonsense, we shall be out of it. She, you think so? He, I am sure of it, if there is any power in steam or horseflesh to carry us away. Ha ha. She, and the fun of the situation comes in where my Lancelot. He, know where Guinevere, I was only thinking of something. She, they say men have a keener sense of humor than women. Now, I was thinking of the scandal. He, don't think of anything so ugly, we shall be beyond it. She, it will be there all the same in the mouths of Simla, telegraphed over India, and talked of at the dinners. And when he goes out, they will stare at him to see how he takes it, and we shall be dead, Guy dear, dead, and cast into the outer darkness where there is. He, love, at least isn't that enough? She, I have said so. He and you think so still. She what do you think? He what have I done, it means equal ruin to me, as the world reckons it outcasting the loss of my appointment, the breaking off my life's work, I pay my price. She and are you so much above the world, that you can afford to pay it am I? He my divinity, what else? She a very ordinary woman I am afraid, but so far respectable how do you do Mrs. Middleditch, your husband, I think he's riding down to Annandale with Colonel Statters. Yes, isn't it divine, after the rain, Guy how long am I to be allowed to bow to Mrs. Middleditch, till the 17th? He frowsy Scotchwoman, what is the use of bringing her into the discussion you were saying? She nothing have you ever seen a man hanged? He yes once. She what was it for? He murder of course. She murder is that so great a sin, after all I wonder how he felt before the drop fell. He I don't think he felt much what a gruesome little woman, it is this evening, you're a shivering, put on your cape dear. She I think I will look at the mist coming over Sangiali, and I thought we should have sunshine on the Ladies' Mile, let's turn back. He what's the good there's a cloud on Elysium Hill, and that means it's foggy all down the mall, well go on it'll blow away, before we get to the convent perhaps, Jove it is chilly. She you feel it fresh from below put on your ulster, what do you think of my cape? He never ask a man his opinion of a woman's dress, when he is desperately and abjectly in love with the wearer. Let me look like everything else of yours, it's perfect, where did you get it from? He gave it me on Wednesday, our wedding day you know. He the deuce he did he's growing generous in his old age do. Like all that frilly bunchy stuff at the throat I don't. She don't you? Kind sir owe your courtesy. As you go by the town sir. Pray you owe your love for me. Buy me a russet gown sir. He I want say keek into the drawell Janet, Janet, only wait a little darling, and you shall be stocked with russet gowns, and everything else. She and when the frocks wear out y'all get me new ones, and everything else. He assuredly. She I wonder. He look here sweetheart, I didn't spend 2 days, and 2 nights in the train to hear you wonder, I thought we'd settled all that at Chaffee's Hat. She dreamily at Chaffee's Hat does the station go on still that was ages and ages ago, it must be crumbling to pieces. All except the Amertola Kutcha Road, I don't believe that could crumble till the day of judgment. He you think so, what is the mood now? She I can't tell how cold it is let us get on quickly. He better walk a little stop your jampanese, and get out what's the matter with you this evening dear. She nothing you must grow accustomed to my ways, if I am boring you, I can go home. Here's Captain Congleton coming I dare say hell, be willing to escort me. He goose between us two, damn Captain Congleton. She chivalrous knight, is it your habit to swear much in talking it jars a little, and you might swear at me. He my angel, I didn't know what I was saying, and you changed so quickly that I couldn't follow ill apologize in dust and ashes. She there'll be enough of those later on good night Captain Congleton, going to the singing quadrilles already what dances am I giving you next week? No, you must have written them down wrong 5 and 7. I said, if you've made a mistake, I certainly don't intend to suffer for it, you must alter your program. I thought you told me that you had not been going out much this season. She quite true, but when I do I dance with Captain Congleton, he dances very nicely. He and sit out with him I suppose. She yes, have you any objection, shall I stand under the chandelier in future? He what does he talk to you about? She what do men talk about when they sit out? He don't well now I am up, you must dispense with the fascinating Congleton for a while, I don't like him. She after a pause, do you know what you have said? He can't say that I do exactly, I am not in the best of tempers. She so I see and feel my true and faithful lover, where is your eternal constancy, unalterable trust, and reverent devotion? I remember those phrases, you seem to have forgotten them, I mention a man's name. He a good deal more than that. She will speak to him about a dance, perhaps the last dance, that I shall ever dance in my life before I go away, and you at once distrust and insult me. I never said a word. She how much did you imply Guy, is this amount of confidence, to be our stock to start the new life on? He no of course not I didn't mean that, on my word and honor, I didn't let it pass dear please let it pass. She this once yes and a second time and again, all through the years, when I shall be unable to resent it, you want too much my Lancelot, and you know too much. How do you mean? She that is a part of the punishment, there cannot be perfect trust between us. He in heaven's name, why not? She hushed, the other place is quite enough, ask yourself. He I don't follow. She you trust me so implicitly, that when I look at another man, never mind guy, have you ever made love to a good girl? He's something of the sort centuries ago in the dark ages, before I ever met you, dear. She tell me what you said to her. He what does a man say to a girl, I forgot. She I remember he tells her that he trusts her, and worships the ground she walks on, and that he'll love and honor, and protect her till her dying day. And so she marries in that belief, at least I speak of one girl who was not protected. He well and then. She and then guy, and then that girl needs 10 times the love and trust. And honor, yes honor, that was enough when she was only a mere wife if the other life she chooses to lead, is to be made even bearable, do you understand? He even bearable, it'll be paradise. She can you give me all I've asked for, not now nor a few months later, but when you begin to think of what you might have done if you had kept your own appointment, and your caste here, when you begin to look upon me as a drag, and a burden, I shall want it most then guy, for there will be no one in the wide world but you. You're a little overtired tonight, sweetheart, and you're taking a stage view of the situation after the necessary business in the courts, the road is clear too. She the holy state of matrimony, ha ha ha. He ssh don't laugh in that horrible way. She iiccc can't help it, isn't it too absurd? Ah ha ha ha, guy stop me quick, or I shall laugh till we get to the church. He for goodness sake stop, don't make an exhibition of yourself, what is the matter with you? She nothing, I am better now. He that's all right, one moment dear, there's a little wisp of hair got loose from behind your right ear, and it's straggling over your cheek so. She think I am afraid my hat's on one side too. He what do you wear these huge dagger bonnet skewers, for they're big enough to kill a man with. She don't kill me though, you're sticking it into my head, let me do it, you men are so clumsy. He have you had many opportunities of comparing us in this sort of work? She guy what is my name? He I don't follow. She here's my card case, can you read? He yes well. She well that answers your question, you know the other's man's name, am I sufficiently humbled, or would you like to ask me if there is anyone else? He I see now my darling, I never meant, that for an instant, I was only joking, they're lucky, there's no one on the road they'd be scandalized. She they'll be more scandalized before the end. He I don't like you to talk in that way. She unreasonable man who asked me to face the situation, and accept it, tell me do I look like Mrs. Penner, do I look like a naughty woman, swear, I don't give me your word of honor, my honorable friend, that I am not like Mrs. Busgago, that's the way she stands with her hands clasped at the back of her head, diu like that. He don't be affected. She I am not, I am Mrs. Busgago, listen. Pendant un and tout entier. Le regiment ne pas arparu. Au ministre de la guerre. En la arporta que me perdu. En si arnon retroutruver sa trace. Quand un matin subitement. En la vite reparator sur la place. El Colonel Taugers en avant. That's the way she rolls her RS, am I like her? He no, but I object when you go on like an actress and sing stuff of that kind. Where in the world did you pick up the chanson du Colonel? It isn't a drawing room song, it isn't proper. She Mrs. Busgago taught it me, she is both drawing room and proper, and in another month she'll shut her drawing room to me. And thank God she isn't as improper as I am. Oh guy, I wish I was like some women, and had no scruples about what is it Keane says, wearing a corpse's hair, and being false to the bread they eat. I am only a man of limited intelligence, and just now very bewildered, when you have quite finished flashing through all your moods, tell me and try to understand the last one. She moods guy, I haven't any, I am 16 years old, and you're just 20, and you've been waiting for 2 hours outside the school in the cold, and now I've met you and now we're walking home together. Does that suit you, my imperial majesty? He know we aren't children, why can't you be rational? He asks me that when I'm going to commit suicide for his sake, and I don't want to be French and rave about my mother. But have I ever told you that I have a mother and a brother who was my pet before I married? He's married. Now, can't you imagine the pleasure that the news of the elopement will give him? Have you any people at home, guy, to be pleased with your performances? He one or two, one can't make omelets without breaking eggs. She slowly, I don't see the necessity. He ha, what do you mean? Shall I speak the truth? He under the circumstances, perhaps it would be as well. She guy I am afraid. He I thought we'd settled all that would've. She of you. He oh damn it all the old business this is too bad. She of you. He and what now? She what do you think of me? He beside the question altogether, what do you intend to do? She I daren't risk it I'm afraid if I could only cheat. He a la Bazgago no, thanks that's the one point on which I have any notion of honor I want eat his salt, and steal too ill loot openly or not at all. She I never meant anything else. He then why in the world, do you pretend not to be willing to come? She it's not pretense guy I am afraid. He please explain. She it can't last guy it can't last y'all get angry, and then y'all swear, and then y'all get jealous, and then y'all mistrust me you do now and you yourself will be the best reason for doubting. And I what shall I do? I shall be no better than Mrs. Bazgago found out no better than anyone, and y'all know that oh guy can't you see? He I see that you are desperately unreasonable little woman. She there the moment I begin to object you get angry what will you do, when I am only your property stolen property, it can't be guy it can't be I thought it could. But it can't y'all get tired of me. He I tell you, I shall not want anything make you understand that. She there can't you see if you speak to me like that now y'all call me horrible names later, if I don't do everything as you like. And if you were cruel to me guy, where should I go I can't trust you oh, I can't trust you. He I suppose I ought to say that I can trust you I've ample reason. She please don't dear it hurts as much as if you hit me. He it isn't exactly pleasant for me. She I can't help it I wish I were dead I can't trust you, and I don't trust myself, oh guy let it die away and be forgotten. He too late now, I don't understand you I want, and I can't trust myself to talk this evening may I call tomorrow. She yes no, oh give me time the day, after I get into my rickshaw here, and meet him at Politis you ride. He ill go on to Politis too, I think I want a drink my world's knocked about my ears. And the stars are falling who are those brutes howling in the old library? She there rehearsing the singing quadrilles for the fancy ball, can't you hear Mrs. Bazgago's voice? She has a solo, it's quite a new idea listen. Mrs. Bazgago in the old library con molt exp. Seesaw Marjorie Daw. Sold her bed to lie upon straw. Wasn't she a silly slut? To sell her bed and lie upon dirt. Captain Congleton, I am going to alter that to flirt it sounds better. He know I've changed my mind about the drink good night little lady, I shall see you tomorrow. She is good night guy don't be angry with me. He angry you know, I trust you absolutely good night, and God bless you. 3 seconds later alone, him id, give something to discover whether there's another man at the back of all this. A second-rate woman. Est fuga volviter rota. On we drift where looms the dim port. 1 2 3 4 5, contribute their quota. Something is gained if one caught but the imp. Show it us Hughes of Saxgotha. Master Hughes of Saxgotha. Dressed don't tell me that woman ever dressed in her life, she stood in the middle of the room while her aya know her husband it must have been a man threw her clothes at her. She then did her hair with her fingers, and rubbed her bonnet in the flue under the bed. I know, she did as well as if I had assisted at the orgy. Who is she said Mrs. Hawksby. Don't said Mrs. Mallow, feebly you make my head ache, I am miserable today stay me with fondants, comfort me with chocolates for I am. Did you bring anything from Politis? Questions to begin with you shall have the sweets when you have answered them. Who, and what is the creature there were at least 6 men round her, and she appeared to be going to sleep in their midst. Delville said Mrs. Mallow shady Delville, to distinguish her from Mrs. Jim of that ilk. She dances as untidily as she dresses I believe, and her husband is somewhere in Madras go and call if you are so interested. What have I to do with Shigramidish women? She merely caught my attention for a minute, and I wondered at the attraction that a Dowd has for a certain type of man. I expected to see her walk out of her clothes, until I looked at her eyes. Hooks and eyes surely drawled Mrs. Mallow. Don't be clever Polly, you make my head ache, and round this hayrick stood a crowd of men, a positive crowd. Perhaps they also expected. Polly don't be Rabelaisian. Mrs. Mallow curled herself up comfortably on the sofa, and turned her attention to the sweets. She and Mrs. Hawksby shared the same house at Simla, and these things befell 2 seasons after the matter of Otis year, which has been already recorded. Mrs. Hawksby stepped into the veranda, and looked down upon them all her forehead puckered with thought. Ha, said Mrs. Hawksby, shortly indeed. What is it? Said Mrs. Mallow sleepily. That dowd, and the dancing master to whom I object. Why, to the dancing master, he is a middle-aged gentleman of reprobate and romantic tendencies, and tries to be a friend of mine. Then make up your mind, to lose him dowds cling by nature, and I should imagine that this animal, how terrible her bonnet looks from above, is specially clingsome. She is welcome to the dancing master so far as I am concerned. I never could take an interest in a monotonous liar. The frustrated aim of his life is to persuade people that he is a bachelor. Ooh, I think I've met that sort of man before, and isn't he? No, he confided that to me a few days ago. Some men ought to be killed. What happened then? He posed as the horror of horrors, a misunderstood man. Heaven knows the femme comprise is sad enough, and bad enough, but the other thing. And so fat too. I should have laughed in his face. Men seldom confide in me. How is it they come to you? For the sake of impressing me with their careers in the past, protect me from men with confidences. And yet you encourage them. What can I do? They talk, I listen. And they vow that I am sympathetic. I know, I always profess astonishment, even when the plot is of the most old possible. Yes, men are so unblushingly explicit, if they are once allowed to talk, whereas women's confidences are full of reservations and fibs, except when they go mad and babble of the unutterabilities, after a week's acquaintance. Really, if you come to consider, we know a great deal more of men than of our own sex. And the extraordinary thing is that men will never believe it. They say, we are trying to hide something. They are generally doing that on their own account. Alas, these chocolates pall upon me, and I haven't eaten more than a dozen. I think I shall go to sleep. Then y'all get fat, dear. If you took more exercise, and a more intelligent interest in your neighbors, you would be as much loved as Mrs. Hawksby. You're a darling in many ways, and I like you. You are not a woman's woman. But why do you trouble yourself about mere human beings? Because in the absence of angels, who I am sure would be horribly dull, men and women are the most fascinating things in the whole wide world. Lazy one. I am interested in the dowd, I am interested in the dancing master, I am interested in the holly boy, and I am interested in you. Why couple me with the holly boy? He is your property. Yes, and in his own guileless speech, I am making a good thing out of him when he is slightly more reformed, and has passed his higher standard, or whatever the authorities think fit to exact from him. I shall select a pretty little girl, the Holt girl, I think, and here, she waved her hands airily, whom Mrs. Hawksby hath joined together. Let no man put asunder, that's all. And when you have yoked May Holt with the most notorious detrimental in Simla, and earned the undying hatred of Mamma Holt, what will you do with me, dispenser of the destinies of the universe? Mrs. Hawksby dropped into a low chair in front of the fire, and chin in hand, gazed long and steadfastly at Mrs. Mallow. I do not know, she said, shaking her head, what I shall do with you, dear. It's obviously impossible to marry you to someone else. Your husband would object, and the experiment might not be successful. After all, I think I shall begin by preventing you from sleeping on alehouse benches and snoring in the sun. I don't like your quotations, they are so rude. Go to the library and bring me new books. While you sleep, no, if you don't come with me, I shall spread your newest frock on my rickshaw, and when anyone asks me what I am doing, I shall say that I am going to Phelps to get it let out. I shall take care that Mrs. McNamara sees me put your things on. There's a good girl. Mrs. Mallow groaned and obeyed, and the two went off to the library, where they found Mrs. Delville, and the man who went by the nickname of the dancing master. By that time, Mrs. Mallow was awake and eloquent. That is the creature, said Mrs. Hawksby, with the air of one pointing out a slug in the road. No, said Mrs. Mallow, the man is the creature. Good evening, Mr. Bent. I thought you were coming to tea this evening. Surely it was for tomorrow, was it not? Answered the dancing master. I understood. I fancied. I am so sorry. How very unfortunate. But Mrs. Mallow had passed on. For the practiced equivocator you said he was, murmured Mrs. Hawksby. He strikes me as a failure. Now wherefore should he have preferred a walk with the dowd to tea with us? Elective affinities. I suppose both. Grubby Polly, I'd never forgive that woman as long as the world rolls. I forgive every woman everything, said Mrs. Mallow. He will be a sufficient punishment for her. What a common voice she has. Mrs. Delville's voice was not pretty, her carriage was even less lovely, and her raiment was strikingly neglected. All these things Mrs. Mallow noticed over the top of a magazine. Now what is there in her, said Mrs. Hawksby. Do you see what I meant about the clothes falling off? If I were a man, I would perish sooner than be seen with that ragbag. And yet she has good eyes, but oh. What is it? She doesn't know how to use them, on my honor. She does not look, oh look, untidiness. I can endure, but ignorance, never the woman's a fool. HSH shall hear you. All the women in Simla are fools, shall think I mean someone else. Now she's going out. What a thoroughly objectionable couple she and the dancing master make, which reminds me, do you suppose they'll ever dance together? Wait and see. I don't envy her the conversation of the dancing master, loathly man. His wife ought to be up here before long. Do you know anything about him? Only what he told me. It may be all a fiction. He married a girl bred in the country, I think, and being an honorable, chivalrous soul, told me that he repented his bargain, and sent her to her as often as possible. A person who has lived in the dunes since the memory of man, and goes to Mussoorie when other people go home. The wife is with her at present, so he says. Babies. One only, but he talks of his wife in a revolting way. I hated him for it. He thought he was being epigrammatic and brilliant. That is a vice peculiar to men. I dislike him, because he is generally in the wake of some girl, disappointing the eligibles. He will persecute May Holt, no more, unless I am much mistaken. No, I think Mrs. Delville may occupy his attention for a while. Do you suppose she knows that he is the head of a family? Not from his lips. He swore me to eternal secrecy. Wherefore I tell you, don't you know that type of man? Not intimately, thank goodness. As a general rule, when a man begins to abuse his wife to me, I find that the Lord gives me wherewith to answer him according to his folly, and we part with a coolness between us. I laugh. I am different. I've no sense of humor. Cultivate it, then. It has been my mainstay for more years than I care to think about. A well-educated sense of humor will save a woman when religion, training, and home influences fail, and we may all need salvation sometimes. Do you suppose that the Delville woman has humor? Her dress betrays her. How can a thing who wears her supplement under her left arm have any notion of the fitness of things, much less their folly? If she discards the dancing master, after having once seen him dance, I may respect her otherwise. But are we not both assuming a great deal too much, dear? You saw the woman at Pelitis half an hour later. You saw her walking with the dancing master an hour later. You met her here at the library. Still with the dancing master, remember. Still with the dancing master, I admit. But why on the strength of that should you imagine? I imagine nothing. I have no imagination. I am only convinced that the dancing master is attracted to the dowd, because he is objectionable in every way, and she in every other. If I know the man as you have described him, he holds his wife in slavery at present. She is 20 years younger than he. Poor wretch, and in the end, after he has posed and swaggered, and lied, he has a mouth under that ragged mustache, simply made for lies. He will be rewarded according to his merits. I wonder what those really are, said Mrs. Mallow. But Mrs. Hawksby, her face close to the shelf of the new books, was humming softly, What shall he have who killed the deer? She was a lady of unfettered speech. 1 month later, she announced her intention of calling upon Mrs. Delville. Both Mrs. Hawksby and Mrs. Mallow were in mourning wrappers, and there was a great peace in the land. I should go as I was, said Mrs. Mallow. It would be a delicate compliment to her style. Mrs. Hawksby studied herself in the glass. Assuming for a moment that she ever darkened these doors, I should put on this robe after all the others to show her what a mourning wrapper ought to be. It might enliven her. As it is, I shall go in the dove-colored sweet emblem of youth and innocence, and shall put on my new gloves. If you really are going, dirty tan would be too good, and you know that dove-color spots with the rain. I care not. I may make her envious, at least. I shall try, though one cannot expect very much from a woman who puts a lace tucker into her habit. Just heavens, when did she do that? Yesterday, riding with the dancing master, I met them at the back of Jacko, and the rain had made the lace lie down to complete the effect. She was wearing an unclean tirai with the elastic under her chin. I felt almost too well content to take the trouble to despise her. The Holly boy was riding with you. What did he think? Does a boy ever notice these things? Should I like him? If he did, he stared in the rudest way. And just when I thought he had seen the elastic, he said, There's something very taking about that face. I rebuked him on the spot. I don't approve of boys being taken by faces other than your own. I shouldn't be in the least surprised if the Holly boy immediately went to call I forbade him, let her be satisfied with the dancing master and his wife. When she comes up I am rather curious to see Mrs. Bent and the Delville woman together. Mrs. Hawksby departed, and at the end of an hour returned slightly flushed. There is no limit to the treachery of youth, I ordered the Holly boy, as he valued my patronage, not to call the first person I literally stumble over in her poky dark little drawing-room, is of course the Holly boy. She kept us waiting 10 minutes, and then emerged, as though she had been tipped out of the dirty clothes basket. You know my way, dear, when I am at all put out I was superior, rushingly superior, lifted my eyes to heaven, and had heard of nothing, dropped my eyes on the carpet, and really didn't know, played with my card case, and supposed so. The Holly boy giggled like a girl, and I had to freeze him with scowls between the sentences. And she sat in a heap on the edge of a couch, and managed to convey the impression that she was suffering from stomachache at the very least. It was all I could do not to ask after her symptoms. When I rose, she grunted just like a buffalo in the water, too lazy to move. Are you certain? Am I blind, Polly? Laziness, sheer laziness, nothing else. Or her garments were only constructed for sitting down, and I stayed, for a quarter of an hour, trying to penetrate the gloom, to guess what her surroundings were like, while she stuck out her tongue. Lucy. Well, ill withdraw the tongue, though I am sure if she didn't do it when I was in the room she did the minute I was outside. At any rate she lay in a lump, and grunted. Ask the Holly boy, dear. I believe the grunts were meant for sentences, but she spoke so indistinctly that I can't swear to it. You are incorrigible, simply. I am not. Treat me civilly, give me peace with honor, don't put the only available seat facing the window, and a child may eat jam in my lap before church. But I resent being grunted at. Wouldn't you? Do you suppose that she communicates her views on life and love to the dancing master in a set of modulated grmphs? You attach too much importance to the dancing master. He came as we went, and the Dowd grew almost cordial at the sight of him. He smiled greasily, and moved about that darkened dog kennel in a suspiciously familiar way. Don't be uncharitable, any sin, but that ill forgive. Listen to the voice of history, I am only describing what I saw. He entered the heap on the sofa, revived slightly, and the Holly boy and I came away together. He is disillusioned, but I felt it my duty to lecture him severely for going there, and that's all. Now for pity's sake leave the wretched creature, and the dancing master alone. They never did you any harm. No harm to dress as an example and a stumbling block for half Simla, and then to find this person who is dressed by the hand of God. Not that I wish to disparage him for a moment, but you know the ticka Dursey way he attires those lilies of the field. This person draws the eyes of men, and some of them nice men. It's almost enough to make one discard clothing. I told the Holly boy so. And what did that sweet youth do? Turned shell-pink, and looked across the far blue hills like a distressed cherub. I talking wildly, Polly, let me say my say, and I shall be calm, otherwise I may go abroad and disturb Simla with a few original reflections. Excepting always your own sweet self, there isn't a single woman in the land who understands me when I am what's the word? Tedafel, suggested Mrs. Mallow. Exactly, and now let us have tiffin. The demands of society are exhausting, and as Mrs. Delville says here, Mrs. Hawksby, to the horror of the Kitmakers, lapsed into a series of grunts, while Mrs. Mallow stared in lazy surprise. God gie us a guid conceit of ourselves, said Mrs. Hawksby, piously returning to her natural speech. Now in any other woman that would have been vulgar. I am consumed with curiosity to see Mrs. Bent. I expect complications. Woman of one idea, said Mrs. Mallow, shortly. All complications are as old as the hills I have lived through or near. All. And yet do not understand that men and women never behave twice alike. I am old, who was young. If ever I put my head in your lap, you dear big skeptic, you will learn that my parting is gauze. But never, no, never have I lost my interest in men and women, Polly. I shall see this business out to the bitter. I am going to sleep, said Mrs. Mallow calmly. I never interfere with men or women unless I am compelled, and she retired with dignity to her own room. Mrs. Hawksby's curiosity was not long left ungratified, for Mrs. Bent came up to Simla a few days after the conversation faithfully reported above, and pervaded the mall by her husband's side. Behold, said Mrs. Hawksby, thoughtfully rubbing her nose, that is the last link of the chain. If we omit the husband of the Delville, whoever he may be, let me consider the Bents, and the Delvilles inhabit the same hotel, And the devil is detested by the wadi. Do you know the wadi, who is almost as big a dowd the wadi, also abominates the male bent, for which if her other sins do not weigh too heavily, she will eventually go to heaven. Don't be irreverent, said Mrs. Mallow. I like Mrs. Bent's face. I am discussing the wadi, returned Mrs. Hawksby, loftily. The wadi will take the female bent apart, after having borrowed, yes, everything that she can, from hairpins to babies' bottles. Such, my dear, is life in a hotel. The wadi will tell the female bent facts and fictions about the dancing master and the dowd. Lucy, I should like you better if you were not always looking into people's back bedrooms. Anybody can look into their front drawing rooms, and remember, whatever I do, and whatever I look, I never talk, as the wadi will let us hope that the dancing master's greasy smile and manner of the pedagogue will soften the heart of that cow, his wife. If mouths speak truth, I should think that little Mrs. Bent could get very angry on occasion. But what reason has she for being angry? What reason? The dancing master in himself is a reason. How does it go if in his life some trivial errors fall? Look in his face, and y'all believe them. All I am prepared to credit any evil of the dancing master, because I hate him so, and the dowd is so disgustingly badly dressed that she too is capable of every iniquity. I always prefer to believe the best of everybody. It saves so much trouble. Very good. I prefer to believe the worst. It saves useless expenditure of sympathy, and you may be quite certain that the wadi believes with me. Mrs. Mallow sighed and made no answer. The conversation was holden after dinner, while Mrs. Hawksby was dressing for a dance. I am too tired to go, pleaded Mrs. Mallow, and Mrs. Hawksby left her in peace till 2 in the morning, when she was aware of emphatic knocking at her door. Don't be very angry, dear, said Mrs. Hawksby. My idiot of an ayah has gone home, and as I hope to sleep tonight, there isn't a soul in the place to unlace me. Oh, this is too bad, said Mrs. Mallow sulkily. Can't help it, I am a lone lorn grass widow, dear, but I will not sleep in my stays, and such news too. Oh, do unlace me. There's a darling, the dowd, the dancing master, I, and the holly boy, you know, the north veranda. How can I do anything if you spin round like this, protested Mrs. Mallow, fumbling with the knot of the laces. Oh, I forget, I must tell my tale without the aid of your eyes. Do you know you've lovely eyes, dear? Well, to begin with, I took the holly boy to a Kalajugga. Did he want much taking? Lots. There was an arrangement of loose boxes in Canats, and she was in the next one talking to him. Which how? Explain. You know what I mean. The dowd and the dancing master, we could hear every word, and we listened shamelessly, specially the holly boy. Polly, I quite love that woman. This is interesting there. Now turn round. What happened? One moment. Blessed relief, I've been looking forward to taking them off for the last half-hour, which is ominous at my time of life. But as I was saying, we listened, and heard the dowd drawl worse than ever. She drops her final gs like a barmaid, or a blue-blooded aide-de-camp. Look here, you're gettin' too fond o' me, she said, and the dancing master owned it was so in language that nearly made me Roman 99. The dowd reflected for a while. Then we heard her say, look here, Mr. Bent. Why are you such an awful liar? I nearly exploded, while the dancing master denied the charge. It seems that he never told her he was a married man. I said he wouldn't. And she had taken this to heart on personal grounds, I suppose. She drawled along for 5 minutes, reproaching him with his perfidy, and grew quite motherly. Now you've got a nice little wife of your own, you have, she said. She's 10 times too good for a fat old man like you. And look here, you never told me a word about her, and I've been thinking about it a good deal, and I think you're a liar. Wasn't that delicious? The dancing master maundered and raved, till the holly boy suggested that he should burst in and beat him. His voice runs up into an impassioned squeak when he is afraid the dowd must be an extraordinary woman. She explained that had he been a bachelor she might not have objected to his devotion, but since he was a married man and the father of a very nice baby, she considered him a hypocrite, and this she repeated twice. She wound up her drawl with an I am tellin' you this because your wife is angry with me, and I hate quarrelin' with any other woman, and I like your wife. You know how you have behaved for the last 6 weeks. You shouldn't have done it. Indeed you shouldn't. You're too old and too fat. Can't you imagine how the dancing master would wince at that? Now go away, she said. I don't want to tell you what I think of you because I think you are not nice. I'll stay here till the next dance begins. Did you think that the creature had so much in her? I never studied her as closely as you. Roman 999. It sounds unnatural. What happened? The dancing master attempted blandishment, reproof, jocularity, and the style of the Lord High Warden, and I had almost to pinch the Holly boy to make him keep quiet, she grunted at the end of each sentence. And in the end, he went away swearing to himself quite like a man in a novel. He looked more objectionable than ever. I laughed. I love that woman in spite of her clothes. And now I'm going to bed. What do you think of it? I shan't begin to think till the morning, said Mrs. Mallow, yawning. Perhaps. She spoke the truth. They do fly into it by accident sometimes. Mrs. Hawksby's account of her eavesdropping was an ornate one, but truthful in the main for reasons best known to herself. Mrs. Shady Delville had turned upon Mr. Bent, and rent him limb from limb, casting him away limp and disconcerted air. She withdrew the light of her eyes from him, permanently being a man of resource and anything but pleased in that he had been called both old and fat. He gave Mrs. Bent to understand that he had, during her absence in the dune, been the victim of unceasing persecution at the hands of Mrs. Delville. And he told the tale so often, and with such eloquence, that he ended in believing it, while his wife marveled at the manners and customs of some women. When the situation showed signs of languishing, Mrs. Waddy was always on hand to wake the smoldering fires of suspicion in Mrs. Bent's bosom, and to contribute generally to the peace and comfort of the hotel. Mr. Bent's life was not a happy one, for if Mrs. Waddy's story were true, he was argued his wife untrustworthy to the last degree. If his own statement was true, his charms of manner and conversation were so great that he needed constant surveillance, and he received it till he repented genuinely of his marriage, and neglected his personal appearance. Mrs. Delville alone in the hotel was unchanged. She removed her chair some 6 paces towards the head of the table, and occasionally in the twilight ventured on timid overtures of friendship to Mrs. Bent which were repulsed. She does it for my sake, hinted the virtuous Bent. A dangerous and designing woman, purred Mrs. Waddy. Worst of all, every other hotel in Simla was full. Polly, are you afraid of diphtheria? Of nothing in the world, except smallpox. Diphtheria kills, but it doesn't disfigure. Why do you ask? Because the Bent baby has got it, and the whole hotel is upside down. In consequence, the Waddy has set her 5 young on the rail, and fled. The dancing master fears for his precious throat, and that miserable little woman, his wife, has no notion of what ought to be done. She wanted to put it into a mustard bath for croup. Where did you learn all this? Just now on the Mall. Dr. Howland told me the manager of the hotel is abusing the Bents, and the Bents are abusing the manager. They are a feckless couple. Well, what's on your mind? This, and I know it's a grave thing to ask. Would you seriously object to my bringing the child over here with its mother? On the most strict understanding that we see nothing of the dancing master. He will be only too glad to stay away. Polly, you're an angel. The woman really is at her wit's end. And you know nothing about her. Careless, and would hold her up to public scorn if it gave you a minute's amusement. Therefore you risk your life for the sake of her brat. No, Lou, I am not the angel. I shall keep to my rooms and avoid her. But do as you please, only tell me why you do it. Mrs. Hawksby's eyes softened. She looked out of the window and back into Mrs. Mallow's face. I don't know, said Mrs. Hawksby simply. You dears. Polly, and for aught you knew, you might have taken my fringe off. Never do that again without warning. Now, well, get the rooms ready. I don't suppose I shall be allowed to circulate in society for a month. And I also, thank goodness, I shall at last get all the sleep I want. Much to Mrs. Bent's surprise, she and the baby were brought over to the house almost before she knew where she was. Bent was devoutly and undisguisedly thankful, for he was afraid of the infection, and also hoped that a few weeks in the hotel alone with Mrs. Delville might lead to explanations. Mrs. Bent had thrown her jealousy to the winds in her fear for her child's life. We can give you good milk, said Mrs. Hawksby to her, and our house is much nearer to the doctor's than the hotel, and you won't feel as though you were living in a hostile camp. Where is the dear Mrs. Waddy? She seemed to be a particular friend of yours. They've all left me, said Mrs. Bent bitterly. Mrs. Waddy went first. She said I ought to be ashamed of myself for introducing diseases there, and I am sure it wasn't my fault, that little Dora. How nice, cooed Mrs. Hawksby. The Waddy is an infectious disease herself, more quickly caught than the plague, and the taker runs presently mad. I lived next door to her at the Elysium 3 years ago. Now see, you won't give us the least trouble, and I've ornamented all the house with sheets soaked in carbolic. It smells comforting, doesn't it? Remember, I am always in call, and my aya's at your service when yours goes to her meals, and if you cry, I'll never forgive you. Dora Bent occupied her mother's unprofitable attention through the day, and the night the doctor called thrice in the 24 hours, and the house reeked with the smell of the Candice fluid chlorinator and carbolic acid washes. Mrs. Mallow kept to her own rooms. She considered that she had made sufficient concessions in the cause of humanity, and Mrs. Hawksby was more esteemed by the doctor as a help in the sickroom than the half-distraught mother. "I know nothing of illness," said Mrs. Hawksby to the doctor, "only tell me what to do and I'll do it. Keep that crazy woman from kissing the child, and let her have as little to do with the nursing as you possibly can," said the doctor. "Id turn her out of the sickroom, but that I honestly believe she'd die of anxiety. She is less than no good, and I depend on you and the ayahs, remember." Mrs. Hawksby accepted the responsibility, though it painted olive hollows under her eyes, and forced her to her oldest dresses. Mrs. Bent clung to her with more than childlike faith. "I know y'all make Dora well want you," she said at least 20 times a day, and 20 times a day. Mrs. Hawksby answered valiantly, "Of course I will." But Dora did not improve, and the doctor seemed to be always in the house. "There's some danger of the thing taking a bad turn," he said. "I'll come over between 3 and 4 in the morning tomorrow." "Good gracious," said Mrs. Hawksby, "he never told me what the turn would be. My education has been horribly neglected, and I have only this foolish motherwoman to fall back upon." The night wore through slowly, and Mrs. Hawksby dozed in a chair by the fire. There was a dance at the Viceregal Lodge, and she dreamed of it till she was aware of Mrs. Bent's anxious eyes staring into her own. wake up, do something," cried Mrs. Bent piteously. "Dora's choking to death. Do you mean to let her die?" Mrs. Hawksby jumped to her feet and bent over the bed. The child was fighting for breath, while the mother wrung her hands despairingly. "Oh, what can I do? What can you do? She won't stay still. I can't hold her. Why didn't the doctor say this was coming?" screamed Mrs. Bent. "Want you help me? She's dying." I've never seen a child die before," stammered Mrs. Hawksby feebly, and then let none blame her weakness after the strain of long watching. She broke down and covered her face with her hands. The ayahs on the threshold snored peacefully. There was a rattle of rickshaw wheels below, the clash of an opening door, a heavy step on the stairs, and Mrs. Delville entered to find Mrs. Bent screaming for the doctor. As she ran round the room, Mrs. Hawksby, her hands to her ears, and her face buried in the chintz of a chair, was quivering with pain at each cry from the bed, and murmuring, "Thank God, I never bore a child. Oh, thank God, I never bore a child." Mrs. Delville looked at the bed for an instant, took Mrs. Bent by the shoulders, and said quietly, "Get me some caustic, be quick." The mother obeyed mechanically. Mrs. Delville had thrown herself down by the side of the child, and was opening its mouth. "Oh, you're killing her," cried Mrs. Bent. "Where's the doctor? Leave her alone." Mrs. Delville made no reply for a minute, but busied herself with the child. "Now the caustic, and hold a lamp behind my shoulder. Will you do as you are told? The acid bottle, if you don't know what I mean," she said. A second time Mrs. Delville bent over the child. Mrs. Hawksby, her face still hidden, sobbed and shivered. One of the ayahs staggered sleepily into the room, yawning. "Dr. Sahib come." Mrs. Delville turned her head. "You're only just in time," she said. "It was chalk in her when I came, and I've burnt it." There was no sign of the membrane getting to the air passages after the last steaming. "It was the general weakness I feared," said the doctor half to himself, and he whispered, as he looked, "You've done what I should have been afraid to do without consultation." "She was dyin'," said Mrs. Delville under her breath. "Can you do anything? What a mercy it was I went to the dance." Mrs. Hawksby raised her head. "Is it all over?" she gasped. "I am useless. I am worse than useless. What are you doing here?" She stared at Mrs. Delville, and Mrs. Bent, realizing for the first time who was the goddess from the machine, stared also. Then Mrs. Delville made explanation, putting on a dirty long glove and smoothing a crumpled and ill-fitting ball dress. "I was at the dance and the doctor was tellin' me about your baby Bane, so Roman 99, so I came away early and your door was open, and I lost my boy this way 6 months ago, and I've been tryin' to forget it ever since, and I am very sorry for intrudin' in anything that has happened." Mrs. Bent was putting out the doctor's eye with a lamp as he stooped over Dora. "Take it away," said the doctor. "I think the child will do, thanks to you, Mrs. Delville. I should have come too late." But I assure you, he was addressing himself to Mrs. Delville, "I had not the faintest reason to expect this. The membrane must have grown like a mushroom. Will one of you help me, please?" He had reason for the last sentence. Mrs. Hawksby had thrown herself into Mrs. Delville's arms, where she was weeping bitterly, and Mrs. Bent was unpicturesquely mixed up with both, while from the tangle came the sound of many sobs and much promiscuous kissing. "Good gracious, I've spoilt all your beautiful roses," said Mrs. Hawksby, lifting her head from the lump of crushed gum and calico atrocities on Mrs. Delville's shoulder, and hurrying to the doctor. Mrs. Delville picked up her shawl and slouched out of the room, mopping her eyes with the glove that she had not put on. "I always said she was more than a woman," sobbed Mrs. Hawksby hysterically, "and that proves it." 6 weeks later, Mrs. Bent and Dora had returned to the hotel. Mrs. Hawksby had come out of the valley of humiliation, had ceased to reproach herself for her collapse in an hour of need, and was even beginning to direct the affairs of the world as before. "So nobody died and everything went off as it should, and I kissed the Dowd Polly. I feel so old, does it show in my face?" Kisses don't as a rule do they, of course, you know what the result of the Dowds' providential arrival has been. They ought to build her a statue, only no sculptor dare copy those skirts. "Ah," said Mrs. Mallow quietly, "she has found another reward. The dancing master has been smirking through Simla, giving everyone to understand that she came because of her undying love for him to save his child, and all Simla naturally believes this. But Mrs. Bent believes it more than anyone else. She won't speak to the Dowd. Now, isn't the dancing master an angel?" Mrs. Hawksby lifted up her voice and raged. Till bedtime, the doors of the 2 rooms stood open. "Polly," said a voice from the darkness, "what did that Americaner-esque globetrotter girl say last season, when she was tipped out of her rickshaw turning a corner, some absurd adjective that made the man who picked her up explode?" "Paltry," said Mrs. Mallow, through her nose like this. "Hey-ow paltry." "Exactly," said the voice. "Hey-ow paltry it all is." "Which?" "Everything. Baby's diphtheria, Mrs. Bent, and the dancing master, I whooping in a chair, and the Dowd dropping in from the clouds. I wonder what the motive was. All the motives." What do you think?" "Don't ask me. Go to sleep." "Only a subaltern. Not only to enforce by command, but to encourage by example, the energetic discharge of duty, and the steady endurance of the difficulties and privations inseparable from military service." Bengal Army Regulations. They made Bobby Wick pass an examination at Sandhurst. He was a gentleman before he was gazetted, so when the Empress announced that Gentleman Cadet Robert Hannah Wick was posted as second lieutenant to the Tyneside tail twisters at Krabbakar, he became an officer and a gentleman, which is an enviable thing. And there was joy in the house of Wick, where Mama Wick and all the little Wicks fell upon their knees and offered incense to Bobby by virtue of his achievements. Papa Wick had been a commissioner in his day, holding authority over 3 millions of men in the Chota Baldana division, building great works for the good of the land, and doing his best to make 2 blades of grass grow where there was but one before. Of course, nobody knew anything about this in the little English village, where he was just old Mr. Wick, and had forgotten that he was a companion of the Order of the Star of India. He patted Bobby on the shoulder and said, "Well done, my boy." There followed, while the uniform was being prepared, an interval of pure delight, during which Bobby took brevetrank as a man at the women's swamp tennis parties and tea fights of the village, and I daresay, had his joining time been extended, would have fallen in love with several girls at once. Little country villages at home are very full of nice girls, because all the young men come out to India to make their fortunes. "India," said Papa Wick, "is the place. I've had 30 years of it, and begad I'd like to go back again. When you join the tail twisters, you'll be among friends, if everyone hasn't forgotten Wick of Chota Baldana, and a lot of people will be kind to you for our sakes. The mother will tell you more about outfit than I can, but remember this: stick to your regiment, Bobby, stick to your regiment. You'll see men all round you going into the staff corps and doing every possible sort of duty but regimental, and you may be tempted to follow suit now, so long as you keep within your allowance, and I haven't stinted you there. Stick to the line, the whole line, and nothing but the line. Be careful how you back another young fool's bill, and if you fall in love with a woman 20 years older than yourself, don't tell me about it, that's all." With these counsels and many others equally valuable, did Papa Wick fortify Bobby Eyre that last awful night at Portsmouth, when the officers' quarters held more inmates than were provided for by the regulations, and the libertimen of the ships fell foul of the drafts for India, and the battle raged from the dockyard gates even to the slums of Longport, while the drabs of Fratton came down and scratched the faces of the Queen's officers. Bobby Wick, with an ugly bruise on his freckled nose, a sick and shaky detachment to maneuver in ship, and the comfort of 50 scornful females to attend to had no time to feel homesick, till the Malabar reached mid-channel, when he doubled his emotions with a little guard visiting, and a great many other matters. The tail twisters were a most particular regiment. Those who knew them least said that they were eaten up with side, but their reserve and their internal arrangements generally were merely protective diplomacy. Some 5 years before the colonel commanding had looked into the 14 fearless eyes of 7 plump and juicy subalterns, who had all applied to enter the staff corps, and had asked them why the 3 stars should he a colonel of the line command a dashed nursery for double-dashed bottle-suckers who put on condemned tin spurs and rode qualified mokes at the hiatused heads of forsaken black regiments. He was a rude man, and a terrible, wherefore the remnant took measures with the half-butt as an engine of public opinion, till the rumor went abroad that young men, who used the tail twisters as a crutch to the staff corps, had many and varied trials to endure. However, a regiment had just as much right to its own secrets as a woman. When Bobby came up from Deolali and took his place among the tail twisters, it was gently but firmly borne in upon him that the regiment was his father and his mother, and his indissolubly wedded wife, and that there was no crime under the canopy of heaven blacker than that of bringing shame on the regiment, which was the beast-shooting, bestrilled, beast-set-up, bravest, most illustrious, and in all respects most desirable regiment within the compass of the 7 seas. He was taught the legends of the mess plate from the great grinning golden gods that had come out of the summer palace in Pekin to the silver-mounted Markhorhorn snuffmull, presented by the last Roman 100. He who spake to the 7 subalterns, and every one of those legends told him of battles fought at long odds without fear as without support, of hospitality Catholic as an Arabs, of friendships deep as the sea and steady as the fighting line of honor won by hard roads for honor's sake, and of instant and unquestioning devotion to the regiment that claims the lives of all and lives forever. More than once, too, he came officially into contact with the regimental colors, which looked like the lining of a bricklayer's hat on the end of a chewed stick. Bobby did not kneel and worship them, because British subalterns are not constructed in that manner. Indeed, he condemned them for their weight at the very moment that they were filling with awe and other more noble sentiments. But best of all was the occasion when he moved with the tail twisters in review order at the breaking of a November day, allowing for duty men, and sick the regiment was 1,080 strong, and Bobby belonged to them, for was he not a subaltern of the line, the whole line, and nothing but the line, as the tramp of 2,160 sturdy ammunition boots attested? He would not have changed places with Dayton of the horse battery whirling by in a pillar of cloud, to a chorus of strong right, strong left, or Hoganiel of the White Hussars, leading his squadron for all it was worth, with the price of horseshoes thrown in, or Tick Boileau trying to live up to his fierce blue and gold turban, while the wasps of the Bengal cavalry stretched to a gallop in the wake of the long lolloping wailers of the White Hussars. They fought through the clear, cool day, and Bobby felt a little thrill run down his spine when he heard the tinkle-tinkle-tinkle of the empty cartridge cases hopping from the breech blocks after the roar of the volleys, for he knew that he should live to hear that sound in action. The review ended in a glorious chase across the plain, batteries thundering after cavalry, to the huge disgust of the White Hussars, and the Tyneside tail twisters hunting a Sikh regiment, till the lean Lathi Singhs panted with exhaustion. Bobby was dusty and dripping long before noon, but his enthusiasm was merely focused, not diminished. He returned to sit at the feet of Revere, his skipper, that is to say the captain of his company, and to be instructed in the dark art and mystery of managing men, which is a very large part of the profession of arms. "If you haven't a taste that way," said Revere between his puffs of his cheroot, "you'll never be able to get the hang of it. But remember, Bobby, T isn't the best drill, though drill is nearly everything that hauls a regiment through hell and out on the other side. It's the man who knows how to handle men, goatmen, swinemen, dogmen, and so on." "Dormer, for instance," said Bobby. "I think he comes under the head of foolmen. He mopes like a sick owl." "That's where you make your mistake, my son. Dormer isn't a fool yet, but he's a dashed dirty soldier, and his room corporal makes fun of his socks before kit inspection. Dormer, being 2/3 pure brute, goes into a corner and growls." "How do you know?" said Bobby, admiringly. "Because a company commander has to know these things, because if he does not know, he may have crime, murder, brewing under his very nose, and yet not see that it's there. Dormer is being badgered out of his mind, big as he is, and he hasn't intellect enough to resent it. he's taken to quiet boozing and Bobby, when the butt of a room goes on the drink or takes to moping by himself, measures are necessary to pull him out of himself. What measures man can't run round coddling his men forever. No, the men would precious soon show him that he was not wanted. You've got to. Here the color sergeant entered with some papers. Bobby reflected for a while, as Revere looked through the company forms. Does Dormer do anything? Sergeant Bobby asked with the air of one continuing an interrupted conversation. No, sir. Does his duty like a hortomato, said the sergeant, who delighted in long words, a dirty soldier, and ease under full stoppages for new kit. It's covered with scales, sir. Scales? What scales? Fish scales, sir. Ease always pockin' in the mud by the river, and a cleanin' them muchly fish with his thumbs. Revere was still absorbed in the company papers, and the sergeant, who was sternly fond of Bobby, continued, E generally goes down there, when E's got his skinful. Beggin' your pardon, sir, and they do say that the more lush inebriated E is, the more fish E catches. They call I am the loony fishmonger in the company, sir. Revere signed the last paper, and the sergeant retreated. It's a filthy amusement, sighed Bobby to himself, then aloud to Revere, are you really worried about Dormer? A little. You see, he's never mad enough to send to hospital or drunk enough to run in, but at any minute he may flare up brooding and sulking. As he does, he resents any interest being shown in him, and the only time I took him out shooting he all but shot me by accident. I fish, said Bobby with a wry face. I hire a countryboat and go down the river from Thursday to Sunday, and the amiable Dormer goes with me if you can spare us both. You blazing young fool, said Revere, but his heart was full of much more pleasant words. Bobby, the captain of a donie with Private Dormer for mate, dropped down the river on Thursday morning, the private at the bow, the subaltern at the helm. The private glared uneasily at the subaltern, who respected the reserve of the private. After 6 hours, Dormer paced to the stern, saluted, and said, Beg why pardon, sir, but was you ever on the Durham Canal? No, said Bobby. Wick, come and have some tiffin. They ate in silence. As the evening fell, Private Dormer broke forth, speaking to himself. Hi was on the Durham Canal, Jess, such a night come next week. 12-month atrelin of my toes in the water. He smoked, and said no more till bedtime. The witchery of the dawn turned the grey river reaches to purple, gold, and opal, and it was as though the lumbering donie crept across the splendors of a new heaven. Private Dormer popped his head out of his blanket and gazed at the glory below and around. Well, damn my eyes, said Private Dormer in an odd whisper, this air is like a bloomin' gallantry show. For the rest of the day he was dumb, but achieved an ensanguined filthiness through the cleaning of big fish. The boat returned on Saturday evening. Dormer had been struggling with speech since noon. As the lines and luggage were being disembarked, he found tongue. Beg why pardon, sir, he said, but would you min shackin' ends with me, sir? Of course not, said Bobby, and he shook accordingly. Dormer returned to barracks and Bobby to mess. He wanted a little quiet, and some fishing, I think, said Bobby. My aunt, but he's a filthy sort of animal. Have you ever seen him clean them muchly fish with his thumbs? Anyhow, said Revere 3 weeks later, he's doing his best to keep his things clean. When the spring died, Bobby joined in the general scramble for hill leave, and to his surprise and delight, secured 3 months. As good a boy as I want, said Revere, the admiring skipper. The best of the batch, said the adjutant to the colonel. Keep back that young scrimshanker Porkis, sir, and let Revere make him sit up. So Bobby departed joyously to Simla Pahar with a tin box of gorgeous raiment. Son of Wick, old Wick of Chota Baldana, ask him to dinner, dear, said the aged men. What a nice boy, said the matrons and the maids. First-class place, Simla o ripping, said Bobby Wick, and ordered new white cord breeches on the strength of it. We're in a bad way, wrote Revere to Bobby at the end of 2 months. Since you left, the regiment has taken to fever, and is fairly rotten with it. 200 in hospital, about 100 in cells drinking to keep off fever, and the company's on parade 15 files strong at the outside. There's rather more sickness in the out villages than I care for, but then I am so blistered with prickly heat that I am ready to hang myself. What's the yarn about your mashing amiss? Haverly up, they're not serious. I hope you're over young to hang millstones round your neck, and the colonel will turf you out of that in double quick time if you attempt it. It was not the colonel that brought Bobby out of Simla, but a much more respected commandant. The sickness in the out villages spread, the bazaar was put out of bounds, and then came the news that the tail twisters must go into camp. The message flashed to the hill stations. Cholera leave stopped officers recalled alas for the white gloves in the neatly soldered boxes, the rides, and the dances and picnics that were to be the loves half-spoken, and the debts unpaid without demur, and without question fast as Tonga could fly or pony gallop back to their regiments, and their batteries, as though they were hastening to their weddings, fled the subalterns. Bobby received his orders on returning from a dance at Viceregal Lodge, where he had, but only the Haverley girl knows what Bobby had said, or how many waltzes he had claimed for the next ball. 6 in the morning saw Bobby at the Tonga office in the drenching rain, the whirl of the last waltz still in his ears, and an intoxication due neither to wine nor waltzing in his brain. "Good man," shouted Dayton of the horse battery through the mist, "war you raised dat Tonga, I am coming with you, ow. But I've a head and a half, I didn't sit out all night, they say the battery's awful bad," and he hummed dolorously. "Leave the what at the what's its name? Leave the flock without shelter. Leave the corpse uninterred. Leave the bride at the altar. My faith it'll be more bally corpse than bride though this journey jump in Bobby, get on coachman." On the Umbella platform waited a detachment of officers discussing the latest news from the stricken cantonment, and it was here that Bobby learned the real condition of the tail twisters. "They went into camp," said an elderly major recalled from the Whistables at Mussoorie, to a sickly native regiment. "They went into camp with 210 sick, in carts 210 fever cases only, and the balance looking like so many ghosts with sore eyes, a Madras regiment could have walked through 'em. But they were as fit as bedamned when I left them," said Bobby. "Then you'd better make them as fit as bedamned when you rejoin," said the major brutally. Bobby pressed his forehead against the rain-splashed windowpane as the train lumbered across the sodden doab, and prayed for the health of the Tyneside tail twisters. Nanny Tal had sent down her contingent with all speed. The lathering ponies of the Dalhousie Road staggered into Pathankot, taxed to the full stretch of their strength, while from cloudy Darjeeling, the Calcutta mail whirled up the last straggler of the little army that was to fight a fight in which was neither medal nor honor for the winning against an enemy, none other than the sickness that destroyeth in the noonday. And as each man reported himself, he said this is a bad business, and went about his own forthwith, for every regiment and battery in the cantonment was under canvas, the sickness bearing them company. Bobby fought his way through the rain to the tail twister's temporary mess, and Revere could have fallen on the boy's neck, for the joy of seeing that ugly wholesome phiz once more. "Keep 'em amused and interested," said Revere. "They went on the drink, poor fools, after the first 2 cases, and there was no improvement. Oh, it's good to have you back, Bobby Porkis, is a never mind." Dayton came over from the artillery camp to attend a dreary mess dinner, and contributed to the general gloom by nearly weeping over the condition of his beloved battery. Porkis so far forgot himself as to insinuate that the presence of the officers could do no earthly good, and that the best thing would be to send the entire regiment into hospital and let the doctors look after them. Porkis was demoralized with fear, nor was his peace of mind restored when Revere said coldly, "Oh, the sooner you go out the better. If that's your way of thinking, any public school could send us 50 good men in your place. But it takes time, Porkis, and money, and a certain amount of trouble, to make a regiment. S'pose you're the person we go into camp for, eh?" Whereupon Porkis was overtaken with a great and chilly fear, which a drenching in the rain did not allay, and 2 days later quitted this world for another, where men do fondly hope allowances are made for the weaknesses of the flesh. The regimental sergeant major looked wearily across the sergeant's mess tent when the news was announced. "There goes the worst of them," he said. "It'll take the best, and then please God it'll stop." The sergeants were silent, till one said it couldn't be him, and all knew of whom Travis was thinking. Bobby Wick stormed through the tents of his company, rallying, rebuking mildly, as is consistent with the regulations, chaffing the faint-hearted, hailing the sound into the watery sunlight, when there was a break in the weather, and bidding them be of good cheer, for their trouble was nearly at an end, scuttling on his dun pony round the outskirts of the camp, and heading back men who, with the innate perversity of British soldiers, were always wandering into infected villages, or drinking deeply from rain-flooded marshes, comforting the panic-stricken with rude speech, and more than once tending the dying who had no friends, the men without townies, organizing with banjos and burnt cork sing-songs, which should allow the talent of the regiment full play, and generally, as he explained, playing the giddy guarding goat all round. "You're worth half a dozen of us," Bobby said. Revere, in a moment of enthusiasm, "how the devil do you keep it up?" Bobby made no answer, but as Revere looked into the breast pocket of his coat, he might have seen there a sheaf of badly written letters, which perhaps accounted for the power that possessed the boy. A letter came to Bobby every other day. The spelling was not above reproach, but the sentiments must have been most satisfactory, for on receipt Bobby's eyes softened marvelously, and he was wont to fall into a tender abstraction, for a while ere, shaking his cropped head, he charged into his work. By what power he drew after him the hearts of the roughest, and the tail-twisters counted in their ranks some rough diamonds indeed, was a mystery to both Skipper and Roman 100, who learned from the regimental chaplain that Bobby was considerably more in request in the hospital tents than the Reverend John Emery. "The men seem fond of you, are you in the hospitals much?" said the colonel, who did his daily round, and ordered the men to get well with a hardness that did not cover his bitter grief. "A little, sir," said Bobby. "Shouldn't go there too often, if I were you. They say it's not contagious, but there's no use in running unnecessary risks. We can't afford to have you down, 6 days later, it was with the utmost difficulty that the postrunner plashed his way out to the camp. With the mailbags, for the rain was falling in torrents, Bobby received a letter, bore it off to his tent, and the program for the next week's sing-song being satisfactorily disposed of, sat down. To answer it for an hour, the unhandy pen twirled over the paper, and where sentiment rose to more than normal tide level, Bobby Wick stuck out his tongue and breathed heavily. He was not used to letter writing. "Beg why pardon, sir," said a voice at the tent door, "but Dormer's orrid bad, sir, and they've taken him orf, sir." "Damn Private Dormer, and you too," said Bobby Wick, running the blotter over the half-finished letter. "Tell him ill come in the morning." "'E's awful bad, sir," said the voice hesitatingly. There was an undecided squelching of heavy boots. "Well," said Bobby impatiently, excusin' himself before, and for talkin' the liberty says, "It would be a comfort for to assist I am, sir, if Tattoo low get my pony here comin' out of the rain, till I am ready. What blasted nuisances you are, that's brandy drink. Some you want it, hang on to my stirrup, and tell me if I go too fast." Strengthened by a forefinger nip, which he swallowed without a wink, the hospital orderly kept up with the slipping, mud-stained, and very disgusted pony as it shambled to the hospital tent. Private Dormer was certainly orrid bad. He had all but reached the stage of collapse, and was not pleasant to look upon. "What's this, Dormer?" said Bobby, bending over the man. "You're not going out this time. You've got to come fishing with me once or twice more yet." The blue lips parted, and in the ghost of a whisper said, "Beg why pardon, sir, disturbin' of you now, but would you min olden my and sir?" Bobby sat on the side of the bed, and the icy cold hand closed on his own like a vice forcing a lady's ring, which was on the little finger deep into the flesh. Bobby set his lips and waited. The water dripping from the hem of his trousers. An hour passed, and the grasp of the hand did not relax, nor did the expression of the drawn face change. Bobby, with infinite craft, lit himself a cheroot with the left hand. His right arm was numb to the elbow, and resigned himself to a night of pain. Dawn showed a very white-faced subaltern sitting on the side of a sick man's cot, and a doctor in the doorway, using language unfit for publication. "Have you been here all night, you young ass?" said the doctor. "There or thereabouts," said Bobby ruefully. "He's frozen on to me." Dormer's mouth shut with a click. He turned his head. Inside, the clinging hand opened, and Bobby's arm fell useless at his side. "Hell do," said the doctor quietly. "It must have been a toss-up all through the night. Think you're to be congratulated on this case?" "Oh bosh," said Bobby. "I thought the man had gone out long ago. Only I didn't care to take my hand away. Rub my arm down, there's a good chap. What a grip the brute has. I am chilled to the marrow." He passed out of the tent shivering. Private Dormer was allowed to celebrate his repulsive death by strong waters 4 days later. He sat on the side of his cot, and said to the patients mildly, "It a liken to a spoken to I am, so I should." But at that time, Bobby was reading yet another letter. He had the most persistent correspondent of any man in camp, and was even then about to write that the sickness had abated, and in another week at the outside, would be gone. He did not intend to say that the chill of a sick man's hand seemed to have struck into the heart whose capacities for affection he dwelt on at such length. He did intend to enclose the illustrated program of the forthcoming sing-song, whereof he was not a little proud. He also intended to write on many other matters, which do not concern us, and doubtless would have done so, but for the slight feverish headache which made him dull and unresponsive at mess. "You are overdoing it." Bobby said his skipper might give the rest of us credit of doing a little work. "You go on, as if you were the whole mess rolled into one. Take it easy. I will, said Bobby. I am feeling done up somehow. Revere looked at him anxiously and said nothing. There was a flickering of lanterns about the camp that night, and a rumor that brought men out of their cots to the tent doors, a paddling of the naked feet of doula-bearers, and the rush of a galloping horse. "What's up?" asked 20 tents, and through 20 tents ran the answer, "Wick, ease down." They brought the news to Revere, and he groaned. "Anyone but Bobby and I shouldn't have cared. The sergeant major was right." "Not going out this journey," gasped Bobby, as he was lifted from the dually. "Not going out this journey." Then, with an air of supreme conviction, "I can't, you see." "Not if I can do anything," said the surgeon major, who had hastened over from the mess, where he had been dining. He and the regimental surgeon fought together with death for the life of Bobby Wick. Their work was interrupted by a hairy apparition, in a blue-gray dressing gown, who stared in horror at the bed, and cried, "Oh my God, it can't be I am," until an indignant hospital orderly whisked him away. If care of man and desire to live could have done aught, Bobby would have been saved. As it was, he made a fight of 3 days, and the surgeon major's brow uncreased. "Well, save him," yet he said, and the surgeon, who, though he ranked with the captain, had a very youthful heart, went out upon the word, and pranced joyously in the mud. "Not going out this journey," whispered Bobby Wick gallantly at the end of the 3rd day. "Bravo," said the surgeon major, "that's the way to look at it, Bobby." As evening fell, a gray shade gathered round Bobby's mouth, and he turned his face to the tent wall wearily. The surgeon major frowned. "I am awfully tired," said Bobby very faintly. "What's the use of bothering me with medicine? I don't want it. Let me alone." The desire for life had departed, and Bobby was content to drift away on the easy tide of death. "It's no good," said the surgeon major. "He doesn't want to live. He's meeting it, poor child," and he blew his nose. Half a mile away, the regimental band was playing the overture to the sing-song, for the men had been told that Bobby was out of danger. The clash of the brass and the wail of the horns reached Bobby's ears. "Is there a single joy or pain that I should never knew? You do not love me, 'tis in vain. Bid me goodbye and go." An expression of hopeless irritation crossed the boy's face, and he tried to shake his head. The surgeon major bent down. "What is it, Bobby?" "Not that waltz," muttered Bobby. "That's our very honest own, mummy dear." With this, he sank into the stupor that gave place to death early next morning. Revere, his eyes red at the rims, and his nose very white, went into Bobby's tent to write a letter to Papa Wick, which should bow the white head of the ex-commissioner of Chota Baldana. In the keenest sorrow of his life, Bobby's little store of papers lay in confusion on the table, and among them, a half-finished letter. The last sentence ran, "So you see, darling, there is really no fear, because as long as I know you care for me, and I care for you, nothing can touch me." Revere stayed in the tent for an hour. When he came out, his eyes were redder than ever. Private Conklin sat on a turn-down bucket and listened to a not unfamiliar tune. Private Conklin was a convalescent and should have been tenderly treated. "Ho," said Private Conklin, "there's another bloomin' orf'cer de Ed." The bucket shot from under him, and his eyes filled with a smithyful of sparks. A tall man in a blue-gray bedgown was regarding him with deep disfavor. "You ought to take shame for yourself, conky orf'cer, bloomin' orf'cer. I'll learn you to misname the likes of Roman 999, Hangel, bloomin' Hangel, that's what is." And the hospital orderly was so satisfied with the justice of the punishment that he did not even order Private Dormer back to his cot. In the matter of a private, "Hurrah, hurrah, a soldier's life for me, shout boys, shout for it. Makes you jolly and free." The Ramrod Court. People who have seen say that one of the quaintest spectacles of human frailty is an outbreak of hysterics in a girls' school. It starts without warning, generally on a hot afternoon among the elder pupils. A girl giggles till the giggle gets beyond control. Then she throws up her head and cries honk, honk, honk like a wild goose, and tears mix with the laughter. If the mistress be wise, she will rap out something severe at this point and check matters. If she be tender-hearted and send for a drink of water, the chances are largely in favor of another girl laughing at the afflicted one and herself, collapsing. Thus the trouble spreads, and may end in half of what answers to the lower sixth of a boys' school rocking and whooping together. Given a week of warm weather, 2 stately promenades per diem, a heavy mutton and rice meal in the middle of the day, a certain amount of nagging from the teachers, and a few other things, some amazing effects develop. At least this is what folks say who have had experience. Now the Mother Superior of a convent and the colonel of a British infantry regiment would be justly shocked at any comparison being made between their respective charges. But it is a fact that under certain circumstances, Thomas in bulk can be worked up into dithering rippling hysteria. He does not weep, but he shows his trouble unmistakably, and the consequences get into the newspapers, and all the good people who hardly know a martini from a Snyder say take away the brute's ammunition. Thomas isn't a brute, and his business, which is to look after the virtuous people, demands that he shall have his ammunition to his hand. He doesn't wear silk stockings, and he really ought to be supplied with a new adjective to help him to express his opinions. But for all that he is a great man, if you call him the heroic defender of the national honor one day and a brutal and licentious soldiery, the next you naturally bewilder him, and he looks upon you with suspicion. There is nobody to speak for Thomas, except people who have theories to work off on him, and nobody understands Thomas except Thomas, and he does not always know what is the matter with himself. That is the prologue. This is the story. Corporal Slane was engaged to be married to Miss Jauncey M. Kenna, whose history is well known in the regiment and elsewhere. He had his colonel's permission, and being popular with the men, every arrangement had been made to give the wedding what Private Ortheris called éclair. It fell in the heart of the hot weather, and after the wedding Slane was going up to the hills with the bride. None the less Slane's grievance was that the affair would be only a hired carriage wedding, and he felt that the éclair of that was meager. Miss M. Kenna did not care so much. The sergeant's wife was helping her to make her wedding dress, and she was very busy. Slane was just then the only moderately contented man in barracks. All the rest were more or less miserable, and they had so much to make them happy, too. All their work was over at 8 in the morning, and for the rest of the day they could lie on their backs and smoke canteen plug and swear at the punkakulis. They enjoyed a fine full-flesh meal in the middle of the day, and then threw themselves down on their cots and sweated and slept till it was cool enough to go out with their townie, whose vocabulary contained less than 600 words, and the adjective, and whose views on every conceivable question they had heard many times before. There was the canteen, of course, and there was the temperance room with the second-hand papers in it, but a man of any profession cannot read for 8 hours a day, in a temperature of 96 degrees or 98 degrees, in the shade, running up sometimes to 103 degrees, at midnight. Very few men, even though they get a pannikin of flat stale muddy beer and hide it under their cots, can continue drinking for 6 hours a day. One man tried, but he died, and nearly the whole regiment went to his funeral, because it gave them something to do. It was too early for the excitement of fever or cholera. The men could only wait and wait and wait, and watch the shadow of the barrack creeping across the blinding white dust. That was a gay life. They lounged about cantonments. It was too hot for any sort of game, and almost too hot for vice, and fuddled themselves in the evening, and filled themselves to distension with the healthy nitrogenous food provided for them, and the more they stoked the less exercise they took, and more explosive they grew. Then tempers began to wear away, and men a brooding over insults, real or imaginary, for they had nothing else to think of. The tone of the repartees changed, and instead of saying light-heartedly, "Ill knock your silly face in," men grew laboriously polite, and hinted that the cantonments were not big enough for themselves and their enemy, and that there would be more space for one of the two in another place. It may have been the devil who arranged the thing, but the fact of the case is that Lawson had for a long time been worrying Simmons in an aimless way. It gave him occupation. The two had their cots side by side, and would sometimes spend a long afternoon swearing at each other. But Simmons was afraid of Lawson, and dared not challenge him to a fight. He thought over the words in the hot, still nights, and half the hate he felt toward Lawson be vented on the wretched punkakuli. Lawson bought a parrot in the bazaar, and put it into a little cage, and lowered the cage into the cool darkness of a well, and sat on the well curb shouting bad language down to the parrot. He taught it to say Simmons, ye sewer, which means swine, and several other things entirely unfit for publication. He was a big gross man, and he shook like a jelly when the parrot had the sentence correctly. Simmons, however, shook with rage, for all the room were laughing at him. The parrot was such a disreputable puff of green feathers, and it looked so human. When it chattered, Lawson used to sit swinging his fat legs on the side of the cot, and ask the parrot what it thought of Simmons. The parrot would answer Simmons, "Ye sewer good boy." Lawson used to say, scratching the parrot's head, "Ye ear," that Sim and Simmons used to turn over on his stomach, and make answer, "I ear take eed, you don't ear something one of these days." In the restless nights, after he had been asleep all day, fits of blind rage came upon Simonner, and held him, till he trembled all over while he thought in how many different ways he would slay Lawson. Sometimes, he would picture himself trampling the life out of the man with heavy ammunition boots, and at others smashing in his face with the butt, and at others jumping on his shoulders, and dragging the head back till the neckbone cracked. Then his mouth would feel hot and fevered, and he would reach out for another sup of the beer in the pannikin. But the fancy that came to him most frequently, and stayed with him longest, was one connected with the great roll of fat under Lawson's right ear. He noticed it first on a moonlight night, and thereafter it was always before his eyes. It was a fascinating roll of fat. A man could get his hand upon it and tear away one side of the neck, or he could place the muzzle of a rifle on it and blow away all the head in a flash. Lawson had no right to be sleek and contented and well todo. When Simmons was the butt of the room some day, perhaps he would show those who laughed at the Simmons sewer joke that he was as good as the rest, and held a man's life in the crook of his forefinger. When Lawson snored, Simmons hated him more bitterly than ever. Why should Lawson be able to sleep when Simmons had to stay awake hour after hour, tossing and turning on the tapes with the dull liver pain gnawing into his right side, and his head throbbing and aching after canteen? He thought over this for many nights, and the world became unprofitable to him. He even blunted his naturally fine appetite with beer and tobacco, and all the while the parrot talked at and made a mock of him. The heat continued, and the tempers wore away more quickly than before. A sergeant's wife died of heat apoplexy in the night, and the rumor ran abroad that it was cholera. Men rejoiced openly, hoping that it would spread and send them into camp, but that was a false alarm. It was late on a Tuesday evening, and the men were waiting in the deep double verandas for last posts, when Simmons went to the box at the foot of his bed, took out his pipe, and slammed the lid down with a bang that echoed through the deserted barrack like the crack of a rifle. Ordinarily speaking, the men would have taken no notice, but their nerves were fretted to fiddlestrings. They jumped up, and 3 or 4 clattered into the barrack room, only to find Simmons kneeling by his box. "Owlet's you, is it?" they said, and laughed foolishly. "We thought 'twas." Simmons rose slowly. If the accident had so shaken his fellows, what would not the reality do? "You thought it was, did you? And what makes you think?" he said, lashing himself into madness, as he went on. "To hell with your thinking, ye dirty spies." Simmons sewer chuckled. The parrot in the veranda, sleepily recognizing a well-known voice now. That was absolutely all. The tension snapped. Simmons fell back on the armrack. Deliberate. Lithe men were at the far end of the room and took out his rifle and packet of ammunition. "Don't go playing the goat," Sims said. Lawson put it down, but there was a quaver in his voice. Another man stooped, slipped his boot, and hurled it at Simmons' head. The prompt answer was a shot which, fired at random, found its billet in Lawson's throat. Lawson fell forward without a word, and the others scattered. "You thought it was," yelled Simmons. "You're driven me to it. I tell you, you're driven me to it. Get up, Lawson, and don't lie shammin' there, you and your blasted parrot that druv me to it." But there was an unaffected reality about Lawson's pose that showed Simmons what he had done. The men were still clamoring on the veranda. Simmons appropriated 2 more packets of ammunition and ran into the moonlight, muttering, "Ill make a night of it, 30 rounds, and the last for myself. Take you that, you dogs." He dropped on one knee and fired into the brown of the men on the veranda, but the bullet flew high and landed in the brickwork with a vicious fant that made some of the younger ones turn pale. It is as musketry theorists observe, one thing to fire and another to be fired at. Then the instinct of the chase flared up. The news spread from barrack to barrack, and the men doubled out, intent on the capture of Simmons, the wild beast, who was heading for the cavalry parade ground, stopping now and again to send back a shot and a lurse in the direction of his pursuers. "Ill learn you to spy on me," he shouted. "Ill learn you to give me dorgs names. Come on the ole lot. Oh, you Colonel John Anthony Deaver Roman 100. B turned toward the infantry mess and shook his rifle. "You think yourself the devil of a man, but I telled you that if you put your ugly old carcass outside o' that door, I'll make you the poorest looking man in the army. Come out, Colonel John Anthony Deaver Roman 100B, come out and see me practice on the range. I am the crack shot of the old bloomin' battalion," in proof of which statement Simmons fired at the lighted windows of the mess house. "Private Simmons company on the cavalry parade ground, sir, with 30 rounds," said a sergeant breathlessly to the colonel. "Shootin' right and left, sir." "Shot Private Lawson. What's to be done, sir?" Colonel John Anthony Deaver Roman 100B sallied out, only to be saluted by a spurt of dust at his feet. "Pull up," said the second in command. I don't want my step in that way, Colonel. He's as dangerous as a mad dog. Shoot him like one, then said the colonel bitterly. If he want take his chance, my regiment too. If it had been the towheads, I could have understood. Private Simmons had occupied a strong position near a well on the edge of the parade ground, and was defying the regiment to come on. The regiment was not anxious to comply, for there is small honor in being shot by a fellow private. Only Corporal Slain rifle in band threw himself down on the ground and wormed his way toward the well. Don't shoot, said he to the men round him, like as not. Yowl, hit me, ill catch the beggar livin'. Simmons ceased shouting for a while, and the noise of trap wheels could be heard across the plain. Major Olden, commanding the horse battery, was coming back from a dinner in the civil lines, was driving after his usual custom, that is to say, as fast as the horse could go. A orfser, a blooming spangled orfser, shrieked Simmons. Ill make a scarecrow of that orfser. The trap stopped. What's this, demanded the major of gunners. You there, drop your rifle. Why, it's Jerry Blazes. I ain't got no quarrel with you, Jerry Blazes. Pass freen and all's well. But Jerry Blazes had not the faintest intention of passing a dangerous murderer. He was, as his adoring battery swore long and fervently, without knowledge of fear. And they were surely the best judges, for Jerry Blazes, it was notorious, had done his possible to kill a man each time the battery went out. He walked toward Simmons with the intention of rushing him and knocking him down. Don't make me do it, sir, said Simmons. I ain't got nothing agin you. Ah, you would. Major broke into a run. Take that then. The major dropped with a bullet through his shoulder, and Simmons stood over him. He had lost the satisfaction of killing Lawson in the desired way. Hut, here was a helpless body to his hand. Should be slip in another cartridge and blow off the head, or with the butt smash in the white face. He stopped to consider, and a cry went up from the far side of the parade ground. He's killed Jerry Blazes. But in the shelter of the Welpelers, Simmons was safe, except when he stepped out to fire. Ill blow your ansome eed off Jerry Blazes, said Simmons reflectively. 6 and 3 is 9, and 1 is 10, and that leaves me another 19, and 1 for myself. He tugged at the string of the second packet of ammunition. Corporal Slain crawled out of the shadow of a bank into the moonlight. I see you, said Simmons. Come a bit furder on an ill do for you. I'm calm, said Corporal Slain briefly. You've done a bad day's work, Sim. Come out air and come back with me. Come, tollogged Simmons, sending a cartridge home with his thumb. Not before I've settled you and Jerry Blazes. The corporal was lying at full length in the dust of the parade ground, a rifle under him. Some of the less cautious men in the distance shouted, shoot, I am slain. You move and our foot slain, said Simmons. And ill kick Jerry Blazes eat in and shoot you after. I ain't movin', said the corporal, raising his head. You daren't at a man on his legs. Let go, Jerry Blazes, and come out, that, with your fists comin' at me. You daren't, you bloomin' dog shooter. I dares. You lie, you mansticker, you sneakin' sheeny butcher. You lie. See, they're slain. Kicked the rifle away and stood up in the peril of his life. Come on now. The temptation was more than Simmons could resist, for the corporal in his white clothes offered a perfect mark. Don't misname me, shouted Simmons, firing. As he spoke, the shot missed, and the shooter, blind with rage, threw his rifle down and rushed at Slain from the protection of the well within striking distance. He kicked savagely at Slain's stomach, but the weedy corporal knew something of Simmons' weakness, and knew too the deadly guard for that kick. Bowing forward and drawing up his right leg till the heel of the right foot was set some 3 inches above the inside of the left kneecap, he met the blow standing on one leg exactly as Gons stand when they meditate and ready for the fall that would follow. There was an oath. The corporal fell over his own left as shinbone met shinbone, and the private collapsed, his right leg broken an inch above the ankle. Pity you don't know that guard, Sim, said Slain, spitting out the dust as he rose, then raising his voice. Come and take him or 5 bruck his leg. This was not strictly true, for the private had accomplished his own downfall, since it is the special merit of that legard that the harder the kick, the greater the kicker's discomfiture. Slain walked to Jerry Blazes and hung over him with ostentatious anxiety, while Simmons, weeping with pain, was carried away. Ope, you ain't urt badly, sir, said Slain. The major had fainted, and there was an ugly ragged hole through the top of his arm. Slain knelt down and murmured, "S'elp me, I believe 'e's dead. Well, if that ain't my blooming luck all over." But the major was destined to lead his battery afield for many a long day with unshaken nerve. He was removed and nursed and petted into convalescence, while the battery discussed the wisdom of capturing Simmons and blowing him from a gun. They idolized their major, and his reappearance on parade brought about a scene nowhere provided for in the army regulations. Great, too, was the glory that fell to Slane's share. The gunners would have made him drunk thrice a day, for at least a fortnight. Even the colonel of his own regiment complimented him upon his coolness, and the local paper called him a hero. These things did not puff him up when the major offered him money, and thanks the virtuous corporal took the one and put aside the other, but he had a request to make, and prefaced it with many a beg pardon. Sir, could the major see his way to letting the Slane Kenna wedding be adorned by the presence of 4 battery horses, to pull a hired barouche? The major could, and so could the battery excessively, so it was a gorgeous wedding. What did I do it for, said Corporal Slane, for the 'orses o' course Johnsy ain't a beauty to look at, but I wasn't goin' to ave a hired turnout Jerry Blazes. If I 'adna wanted something Sim might ha' blowed Jerry Blazes, blooming ead into Hirish stew, for aught it a cared. And they hanged Private Simmon, shanged him as high as Hammond in Hollow Square of the regiment. And the colonel said it was drink, and the chaplain was sure it was the devil, and Simmons fancied it was both, but he didn't know, and only hoped his fate would be a warning to his companions. And half a dozen intelligent publicists wrote 6 beautiful leading articles on the prevalence of crime in the army. But not a soul thought of comparing the blood-minded Simmons to the squawking, gaping schoolgirl with which this story opens. The enlightenments of Paget Roman 1000 p. Because half a dozen grasshoppers under a fern make the field ring with their importunate chink, while thousands of great cattle, reposed beneath the shadow of the British oak, chew the cud, and are silent prey. Do not imagine that those who make the noise are the only inhabitants of the field, that of course they are many in number, or that after all they are other than the little shriveled, meager hopping though loud and troublesome insects of the Our Burke Reflections on the Revolution in France. They were sitting in the veranda of the splendid palace of an Indian proconsul, surrounded by all the glory and mystery of the immemorial East. In plain English, it was a one-storied 10-roomed whitewashed mud-roofed bungalow set in a dry garden of dusty tamarisk trees, and divided from the road by a low mud wall. The green parrots screamed overhead as they flew in battalions to the river for their morning drink. Beyond the wall, clouds of fine dust showed where the cattle and goats of the city were passing. A field to graze. The remorseless white light of the winter sunshine of northern India lay upon everything, and improved nothing from the winding Passion wheel by the lawn tennis court to the long perspective of level road, and the blue-domed tombs of Mohammedan saints just visible above the tree. A happy new year, said Ord to his guest. It's the first you've ever spent out of England, isn't it? Yes, happy new year, said Paget, smiling at the sunshine. What a divine climate you have here. Just think of the brown cold fog hanging over London now. And he rubbed his hands. It was more than 20 years since he had last seen Ord, his schoolmate, and their paths in the world had divided early. The one had quitted college to become a cogwheel in the machinery of the great Indian government. The other, more blessed with goods, had been whirled into a similar position in the English scheme. 3 successive elections had not affected Paget's position with a loyal constituency, and he had grown insensibly to regard himself in some sort as a pillar of the empire, whose real worth would be known later on, after a few years of conscientious attendance at many divisions, after newspaper battles innumerable, and the publication of interminable correspondence, and more hasty oratory than in his calmer moments he cared to think upon. It occurred to him, as it had occurred to many of his fellows in Parliament, that a tour to India would enable him to sweep a larger lyre and address himself to the problems of imperial administration with a firmer hand, accepting therefore a general invitation extended to him by Ord some years before. Paget had taken ship to Karachi, and only overnight had been received with joy by the Deputy Commissioner of Amara. They had sat late discussing the changes and chances of 20 years, recalling the names of the dead, and weighing the futures of the living, as is the custom of men, meeting after intervals of action. Next morning, they smoked the after-breakfast pipe in the veranda, still regarding each other curiously. Paget, in a light grey frock coat, and garments much too thin for the time of the year, and a pugreed sun hat carefully and wonderfully made. Ord in a shooting coat, riding breeches, brown cowhide boots with spurs, and a battered flax helmet. He had ridden some miles in the early morning to inspect a doubtful river dam. The men's faces differed as much as their attire. Ord's, worn and wrinkled around the eyes, and grizzled at the temples, was the harder and more square of the two, and it was with something like envy that the owner looked at the comfortable outlines of Paget's blandly receptive countenance, the clear skin, the untroubled eye, and the mobile, clean-shaved lips. "And this is India," said Paget for the 20th time, staring long and intently at the grey feathering of the tamarisks. "One portion of India, only it's very much like this for 300 miles, in every direction. By the way, now that you have rested a little, I wouldn't ask the old question before. What do you think of the country? 'Tis the most pervasive country that ever yet was seen. I acquired several pounds of your country coming up from Karachi. The air is heavy with it. And for miles and miles along that distressful eternity of rail, there's no horizon to show where air and earth separate. Yes, it isn't easy to see truly or far in India, but you had a decent passage out, hadn't you? Very good on the whole. Your Anglo-Indian may be unsympathetic about one's political views, but he has reduced ship life to a science. The Anglo-Indian is a political orphan, and if he's wise, he won't be in a hurry to be adopted by your party grandmothers. But how were your companions unsympathetic? Well, there was a man called Dawlish, a judge somewhere in this country it seems, and a capital partner at whist, by the way. And when I wanted to talk to him about the progress of India, in a political sense, Ord hid a grin which might, or might, not have been sympathetic. The National Congress movement, and other things in which, as a member of Parliament, I am of course interested. He shifted the subject, and when I once cornered him, he looked me calmly in the eye and said, "That's all Tommy rot, come and have a game at bull. You may laugh, but that isn't the way to treat a great and important question." And knowing who I was, well, I thought it rather rude, don't you know? And yet Dawlish is a thoroughly good fellow. Yes, he's a friend of mine, and one of the straightest men I know. I suppose, like many Anglo-Indians, he felt it was hopeless to give you any just idea of any Indian question without the documents before you. And in this case, the documents you want are the country and the people. Precisely, that was why I came straight to you, bringing an open mind to bear on things. I am anxious to know what popular feeling in India is really like now that it has wakened into political life. The National Congress, in spite of Dawlish, must have caused great excitement among the masses. On the contrary, nothing could be more tranquil than the state of popular feeling. And as to excitement, the people would as soon be excited over the rule of three as over the Congress. Excuse me, Ord, but do you think you are a fair judge? Isn't the official Anglo-Indian naturally jealous of any external influences that might move the masses, and so much opposed to liberal ideas, truly liberal ideas, that he can scarcely be expected to regard a popular movement with fairness? What did Dawlish say about Tommy rot? Think a moment, old man. You and I were brought up together, taught by the same tutors, read the same books, lived the same life and new languages, and work among new races, while you more fortunate remain at home. Why should I change my mind? Our mind, because I change my sky. Why should I and the few hundred Englishmen in my service become unreasonable, prejudiced fossils, while you and your newer friends alone remain bright and open-minded? You surely don't fancy civilians are members of a Primrose League? Of course not, but the mere position of an English official gives him a point of view which cannot but bias his mind on this question. Paget moved his knee up and down a little uneasily as he spoke. That sounds plausible enough, but like more plausible notions on Indian matters, I believe it's a mistake you'll find when you come to consult the unofficial Britain, that our fault as a class, I speak of the civilian noes, rather to magnify the progress that has been made toward liberal institutions. It is of English origin, such as it is, and the stress of our work since the mutiny only 30 years ago has been in that direction. No, I think you will get no fairer or more dispassionate view of the Congress business than such men as I can give you. But I may as well say at once that those who know most of India from the inside are inclined to wonder at the noise our scarcely begun experiment makes in England. But surely the gathering together of Congress delegates is of itself a new thing. There's nothing new under the sun. When Europe was a jungle, half Asia flocked to the canonical conferences of Buddhism, and for centuries the people have gathered at Pun Hurdwar, Trimbek, and Benares in immense numbers. A great meeting, what you call a mass meeting, is really one of the oldest and most popular of Indian institutions. In the case of the Congress meetings, the only notable fact is that the priests of the altar are British, not Buddhist, Jam, or Brahmanical, and that the whole thing is a British contrivance kept alive by the efforts of Messrs. Hume, Eardley, Norton, and Digby. You mean to say, then, it's not a spontaneous movement? What movement was ever spontaneous in any true sense of the word? This seems to be more factitious than usual. You seem to know a great deal about it. Try it by the touchstone of subscriptions, a coarse but fairly trustworthy criterion. And there is scarcely the color of money in it. The delegates write from England that they are out of pocket for working expenses, railway fares, and stationery, mere pasteboard and scaffolding of their show. It is in fact collapsing from mere financial inanition. But you cannot deny that the people of India, who are perhaps too poor to subscribe, are mentally and morally moved by the agitation. Paget insisted. That is precisely what I do deny. The native side of the movement is the work of a limited class, a microscopic minority, as Lord Dufferin described it when compared with the people proper, but still a very interesting class, seeing that it is of our own creation. It is composed almost entirely of those of the literary or clerkly castes who have received an English education. Surely that is a very important class. Its members must be the ordained leaders of popular thought. Anywhere else they might be leaders, but they have no social weight in this topsy-turvy land, and though they have been employed in clerical work for generations, they have no practical knowledge of affairs. A ship's clerk is a useful person, but he is scarcely the captain, and an orderly room writer, however smart he may be, is not the colonel. You see, the writer class in India has never, till now, aspired to anything like command. It wasn't allowed to the Indian gentleman, for thousands of years past, has resembled Victor Hugo's noble Unvrysire, Chatelaine, Lace Écrire, Le Villain, Sa Main Dean, Quand il Scene, Egratine, Le Vellins, and the little Egreligneurs he most likes to make have been scored pretty deeply by the sword. But this is childish and medieval nonsense. Precisely, and from your, or rather, our point of view, the pen is mightier than the sword in this country. It's otherwise. The fault lies in our Indian balances, not yet adjusted to civilized weights and measures. Well, at all events, this literary class represent the natural aspirations and wishes of the people at large, though it may not exactly lead them. And in spite of all you say, Ord, I defy you to find a really sound English radical who would not sympathize with those aspirations. Paget spoke with some warmth, and he had scarcely ceased when a well-appointed dog-cart turned into the compound gates, and Ord rose, saying, "Here is Edwards, the master of the lodge I neglect, so diligently come to talk about accounts, I suppose." As the vehicle drove up under the porch, Paget also rose, saying with the trained effusion born of much practice, "But this is also my friend, my old and valued friend Edwards. I am delighted to see you. I knew you were in India, but not exactly where." "Then it isn't accounts, Mr. Edwards," said Ord cheerily. "Why no, sir, I heard Mr. Paget was coming, and as our works were closed for the new year, I thought I would drive over and see him." A very happy thought. Mr. Edwards, you may not know, Ord, was a leading member of our radical club at Swipton, when I was beginning political life, and I owe much to his exertions. There's no pleasure like meeting an old friend, except perhaps making a new one. I suppose, Mr. Edwards, you stick to the good old cause. Well, you see, sir, things are different out here. There's precious little one can find to say against the government, which was the main of our talk at home, and them that do say things are not the sort o' people a man who respects himself would like to be mixed up with. There are no politics, in a manner of speaking, in India. It's all work. Surely you are mistaken, my good friend. Why, I have come all the way from England, just to see the working of this great national movement. I don't know where you're going to find the nation as moves to begin with, and then you'll be hard put to it to find what they are moving about. It's like this, sir, said Edwards, who had not quite relished being called my good friend. They haven't got any grievance and nothing to hit with, don't you see, sir, and then there's not much to hit against, because the government is more like a kind of general providence, directing an old established state of things, than that at home, where there's something new thrown down for us to fight about every 3 months. You are probably in your workshops, full of English mechanics, out of the way of learning what the masses think. I don't know so much about that. There are 4 of us English foremen, and between 700 and 800 native fitters, smiths, carpenters, painters, and such like. And they are full of the Congress, of course. Never hear a word of it from year's end to year's end, and I speak the talk too, but I wanted to ask how things are going on at home, old Tyler and Brown and the rest. We will speak of them presently, but your account of the indifference of your men surprises me almost as much as your own. I fear You are a backslider from the good old doctrine. Edwards Paget spoke, as one who mourned the death of a near relative. Not a bit, sir, but I should be if I took up with a parcel of baboos pleaders and schoolboys, as never did a day's work in their lives, and couldn't if they tried. And if you was to poll us English railwaymen, mechanics, tradespeople, and the like of that all up and down the country from Peshawar to Calcutta, you would find us mostly in a tale together. And yet you know we're the same English you pay some respect to at home at 'lection time, and we have the pull o' knowing something about it. This is very curious, but you will let me come and see you, and perhaps you will kindly show me the railway works, and we will talk things over at leisure, and about all old friends and old times, added Paget, detecting with quick insight a look of disappointment in the mechanic's face. Nodding briefly to Ord, Edwards mounted his dogcart and drove off. It's very disappointing, said the member to Ord, who, while his friend discoursed with Edwards, had been looking over a bundle of sketches, drawn on grey paper in purple ink, brought to him by a chupercy. Don't let it trouble you, old chap, said Ord sympathetically. Look here, a moment, here are some sketches by the man who made the carved wood screen you admired so much in the dining room, and wanted a copy of, and the artist himself is here too. A native, said Paget. Of course, was the reply. Bishan Sayegh is his name, and he has 2 brothers to help him when there is an important job to do. The 3 go auto partnership. But they spend most of their time and all their money in litigation over an inheritance, and I am afraid they are getting involved. Thoroughbred Sikhs of the old rock, obstinate, touchy, bigoted, and cunning, but good men for all that. Here is Bishan Singh Shal. We ask him about the Congress. But Bishan Singh, who approached with a respectful salam, had never heard of it, and he listened with a puzzled face, and obviously feigned interest to Ord's account of its aims and objects, finally shaking his vast white turban with great significance, when he learned that it was promoted by certain pleaders, named by Ord, and by educated natives. He began with labored respect to explain how he was a poor man with no concern in such matters, which were all under the control of God, but presently broke out of Urdu into familiar Punjabi, the mere sound of which had a rustic smack of village smokereek and ploudil, as he denounced the wearers of white coats, the jugglers with words who filched his field from him, the men whose backs were never bowed in honest work, and poured ironical scorn on the Bengali. He and one of his brothers had seen Calcutta, and being at work, there had Bengali carpenters given to them as assistants. Those carpenters, said Bishan Singh, black apes, were more efficient workmates, and as for the Bengali babuchik, the guttural click needed no interpretation, but Ord translated the rest, while Paget gazed with interest at the woodcarver. He seems to have a most illiberal prejudice against the Bengali, said the Roman 1000p. Yes, it's very sad that for ages outside Bengal, there should be so bitter a prejudice. Pride of race, which also means race hatred, is the plague and curse of India, and it spreads far. Pointed with his riding whip to the large map of India on the veranda wall. See, I begin with the north, said he. There's the Afghan, and as a Highlander he despises all the dwellers in Hindustan with the exception of the Sikh, whom he hates as cordially as the Sikh hates him. The Hindu loathes Sikh and Afghan, and the Rajput. That's a little lower down across this yellow blot of deserthas. A strong objection, to put it mildly, to the Maratha, who, by the way, poisonously hates the Afghan. Let's go north a minute. The Sindhi hates everybody I've mentioned. Very good, well, take less warlike races. The cultivator of northern India domineers over the man in the next province, and the Bihari of the northwest ridicules the Bengali. They are all at one on that point. I am giving you merely the roughest possible outlines of the facts, of course. Bishan Singh, his clean-cut nostrils still quivering, watched the large sweep of the whip as it traveled from the frontier through Sindh, the Punjab, and Rajputana, till it rested by the valley of the Jumna. Had eternal and inextinguishable hate, concluded Ord, flicking the lash of the whip across the large map from east to west, as he sat down. Remember Canning's advice to Lord Granville: never write or speak of Indian things without looking at a map. Paget opened his eyes. Ord resumed, and the race hatred is only a part of it. What's really the matter with Bispan Singh is class hatred, which unfortunately is even more intense and more widely spread. That's one of the little drawbacks of caste, which some of your recent English writers find an impeccable system. The woodcarver was glad to be recalled to the business of his craft, and his eyes shone as he received instructions for a carved wooden doorway for Paget, which he promised should be splendidly executed and dispatched to England in 6 months. It is an irrelevant detail, But in spite of Ord's reminders, 14 months elapsed before the work was finished. Business over Bishan Singh hung about, reluctant to take his leave, and at last joining his hands and approaching Ord with bated breath and whispering humbleness, said he had a petition to make. Ord's face suddenly lost all trace of expressions. Speak on Bishan Singh, said he, and the carver in a whining tone explained that his case against his brothers was fixed for hearing before a native judge, and he dropped his voice still lower, till he was summarily stopped by Ord, who sternly pointed to the gate with an emphatic begone. Bishan Singh, showing but little sign of discomposure, salaamed respectfully to the friends, and departed. Paget looked inquiry. Ord, with complete recovery of his usual urbanity, replied, "It's nothing, only the old story. He wants his case to be tried by an English judge. He all do that." But when he began to hint that the other side were in improper relations with the native judge, I had to shut him up. Gunga Ram, the man he wanted to make insinuations about, may not be very bright, but he's as honest as daylight on the bench. But that's just what one can't get a native to believe. Do you really mean to say these people prefer to have their cases tried by English judges? Why, certainly. Paget drew a long breath. I didn't know that before. At this point, a phaeton entered the compound, and Ord rose with "Confound it. There's old Rassel Khan come to pay one of his tiresome duty calls. I'm afraid we shall never get through our little Congress discussion." Paget was an almost silent spectator of the grave formalities of a visit paid by a punctilious old Mohammedan gentleman to an Indian official, and was much impressed by the distinction of manner and fine appearance of the Mohammedan landholder. When the exchange of polite banalities came to a pause, he expressed a wish to learn the courtly visitor's opinion of the National Congress. Ord reluctantly interpreted, and with a smile which even Mohammedan politeness could not save from bitter scorn, Rassel Khan intimated that he knew nothing about it, and cared still less. It was a kind of talk encouraged by the government for some mysterious purpose of its own, and for his own part he wondered and held his peace. Paget was far from satisfied with this, and wished to have the old gentleman's opinion on the propriety of managing all Indian affairs on the basis of an elective system. Ord did his best to explain, but it was plain the visitor was bored and bewildered. Frankly, he didn't think much of committees. They had a municipal committee at Lahore, and had elected a menial servant and orderly as a member. He had been informed of this on good authority, and after that committees had ceased to interest him, but all was according to the rule of government, and please God, it was all for the best. "What an old fossil it is," cried Paget, as Ord returned from seeing his guest to the door, "just like some old blue-blooded hidalgo of Spain. What does he really think of the Congress after all, and of the elective system? Hates it all like poison. When you are sure of a majority election is a fine system, but you can scarcely expect the Mohammedans, the most masterful and powerful minority in the country, to contemplate their own extinction with joy. The worst of it is that he and his coreligionists, who are many, and the landed proprietors also of Hindu race, are frightened and put out by this election business, and by the importance we have bestowed on lawyers, pleaders, writers, and the like, who have up to now been in abject submission to them. They say, little hut, after all they are the most important faggots in the great bundle of communities, and all the glib bunkum in the world would not pay for their estrangement. They have controlled the land. But I am assured that experience of local self-government in your municipalities has been most satisfactory, and when once the principle is accepted in your centers, don't you know, it is bound to spread, and these important people of yours would learn it like the rest. I see no difficulty at all." And the smooth lips closed with the complacent snap habitual to Paget. Roman 1000p, the man of cheerful yesterdays and confident tomorrows. Ord looked at him with a dreary smile. "The privilege of election has been most reluctantly withdrawn from scores of municipalities. Others have had to be summarily suppressed, and outside the presidency towns, the actual work done has been badly performed. This is of less moment. Perhaps it only sends up the local death rates. Then the fact that the public interest in municipal elections, never very strong, has waned, and is waning in spite of careful nursing on the part of government servants." "Can you explain this lack of interest?" said Paget, putting aside the rest of Ord's remarks. "You may find a ward of the key in the fact that only 1 in every 1,000 of our population can spell. Then they are infinitely more interested in religion and caste questions than in any sort of politics. When the business of mere existence is over, their minds are occupied by a series of interests, pleasures, rituals, superstitions, and the like. Based on centuries of tradition and usage, you perhaps find it hard to conceive of people, absolutely devoid of curiosity, to whom the book, the daily paper, and the printed speech are unknown, and you would describe their life as blank. That's a profound mistake. You are in another land, another century, down on the bedrock of society where the family merely and not the community is all important. The average Oriental cannot be brought to look beyond his clan. His life too is naor complete and self-sufficing, and less sordid and low-thoughted than you might imagine. It is bovine and slow in some respects, but it is never empty. You and I are inclined to put the cart before the horse and to forget that it is the man that is elemental, not the book. The corn and the cattle are all my care, and the rest is the will of God. Why should such folk look up from their immemorially appointed round of duty and interests to meddle with the unknown and fuss with voting papers? How would you, atop of all your interests, care to conduct even 1/10 of your life according to the manners and customs of the Papuans? Let's say that's what it comes to. But if they won't take the trouble to vote, why do you anticipate that Mohammedans, proprietors, and the rest would be crushed by majorities of them? Again Paget disregarded the closing sentence. Because though the landholders would not move a finger on any purely political question, they could be raised in dangerous excitement by religious hatreds. Already the first note of this has been sounded by the people who are trying to get up an agitation on the Kipling question, and every year there is trouble over the Mohammedan Muharram processions. But who looks after the popular rights, being thus unrepresented? The government of Her Majesty, the Queen Empress of India, in which, if the Congress promoters are to be believed, the people have an implicit trust, for the Congress circular, specially prepared for rustic comprehension, says the movement is for the remission of tax, the advancement of Hindustan, and the strengthening of the British government. This paper is headed in large letters, "May the prosperity of the Empire of India endure." Really, said Paget, that shows some cleverness. But there are things better worth imitation in our English methods for political statement than this sort of amiable fraud. Anyhow, resumed Ord, you perceive that not a word is said about elections, and the elective principle, and the reticence of the Congress promoters here shows they are wise in their generation. But the elective principle must triumph in the end, and the little difficulties you seem to anticipate would give way on the introduction of a well-balanced scheme capable of indefinite extension. But is it possible to devise a scheme which, always assuming that the people took any interest in it, without enormous expense, ruinous dislocation of the administration, and danger to the public peace, can satisfy the aspirations of Mr. Hume and his following, and yet safeguard the interests of the Mohammedans, the landed and wealthy classes, the conservative Hindus, the Eurasians, Parsis, Sikhs, Rajputs, native Christians, domiciled Europeans, and others who are each important and powerful in their way? Paget's attention, however, was diverted to the gate, where a group of cultivators stood in apparent hesitation. "Here are the 12 apostles, by Jove, come straight out of Raphael's cartoons," said the Roman 1000p, with the fresh appreciation of a newcomer. Ord, loth to be interrupted, turned impatiently toward the villagers, and their leader, handing his long staff to one of his companions, advanced to the house. It is old Jelbo, the lumherdar or headman of Pind Sharkat, and a very intelligent man for a villager. The Jat farmer had removed his shoes and stood smiling on the edge of the veranda. His strongly marked features glowed with russet bronze, and his bright eyes gleamed under deeply set brows, contracted by lifelong exposure to sunshine. His beard and mustache, streaked with gray, swept from bold cliffs of brow and cheek in the large sweeps one sees, drawn by Michelangelo, and strands of long black hair mingled with the irregularly piled wreaths and folds of his turban, the drapery of stout blue cotton cloth thrown over his broad shoulders, and girt round his narrow loins, hung from his tall form in broadly sculptured folds, and he would have made a superb model for an artist in search of a patriarch. Ord greeted him cordially, and after a polite pause, the countryman started off with a long story told with impressive earnestness. Ord listened, and smiled, interrupting the speaker at times to argue and reason with him in a tone which Paget could hear was kindly, and finally checking the flux of words, was about to dismiss him when Paget suggested that he should be asked about the National Congress. But Jellock had never heard of it. He was a poor man, and such things, by the favor of his honor, did not concern him. "What's the matter with your big friend that he was so terribly in earnest?" asked Paget when he had left. Nothing much, he wants the blood of the people in the next village, who have had smallpox and cattle plague pretty badly, and by the help of a wizard, a courier, and several pigs have passed it on to his own village, wants to know if they can't be run in for this awful crime. It seems they made a dreadful charivari at the village boundary, threw a quantity of spell-bearing objects over the border, a buffalo's skull and other things, then branded a chamois you would call a courier in his hinder parts, and drove him and a number of pigs over into Jelbo's village. Jelbo says he can bring evidence to prove that the wizard directing these proceedings, who is a Sansi, has been guilty of theft, arson, cattle killing, perjury, and murder, but would prefer to have him punished for bewitching them and inflicting smallpox. And how on earth did you answer such a lunatic? Lunatic, the old fellow is as sane as you or I, and he has some ground of complaint against those Sansis. I asked if he would like a native superintendent of police, with some men to make inquiries. But he objected on the grounds the police were rather worse than smallpox and criminal tribes put together. Criminal tribes, sir? I don't quite understand, said Paget. We have in India many tribes of people who in the slack anti-British days became robbers in various kind and preyed on the people. They are being restrained and reclaimed little by little, and in time will become useful citizens. But they still cherish hereditary traditions of crime, and are a difficult lot to deal with. By the way, what about the political rights of these folk under your schemes? The country people call them vermin, but I suppose they would be electors with the rest. Nonsense. A special provision would be made for them in a well-considered electoral scheme, and they would doubtless be treated with fitting severity, said Paget, with a magisterial air. Severity, yes, but whether it would be fitting is doubtful. Even those poor devils have rights, and after all they only practice what they have been taught. But criminals, Ord. Yes, criminals with codes and rituals of crime, gods and godlings of crime, and 100 songs and sayings in praise of it. Puzzling, isn't it? It's simply dreadful. They ought to be put down at once. Are there many of them? Not more than about 60,000 in this province, for many of the tribes broadly described as criminal are really vagabond and criminal only on occasion, while others are being settled and reclaimed. They are of great antiquity, a legacy from the past, the golden glorious Aryan past of Max Muller, Birdwood, and the rest of your spindrift philosophers. An orderly brought a card to Ord, who took it with a movement of irritation at the interruption, and banded it to Paget, a large card with a ruled border in red ink, and in the center in schoolboy copper plate, Mr. Dma Nath, give salam, said the civilian, and there entered in haste slender youth clad in a closely fitting coat of gray homespun tight, trousers, patent leather shoes, and a small black velvet cap. His thin cheek twitched, and his eyes wandered restlessly, for the young man was evidently nervous and uncomfortable, though striving to assume a free and easy air. Your Honor may perhaps remember me, he said in English, and Ord scanned him keenly. I know your face. Somehow you belong to the Shersha district, I think, when I was in charge there. Yes, sir, my father is writer at Shersha, and your Honor gave me a prize when I was first in the middle school examination 5 years ago. Since then I have prosecuted my studies, and I am now second-year student in the mission college. Of course you are Kedar Nath's Santh boy who said he liked geography better than play or sugar cakes, and I didn't believe you. How is your father getting on? He is well, and he sends his salam, but his circumstances are depressed, and he also is down on his luck. You learn English idiom at the mission college, it seems. Yes, sir, they are the best idioms, and my father ordered me to ask your Honor to say a word for him to the present incumbent of your honors, shews the latchet of which he is not worthy to open, and who knows not Joseph, for things are different at Shersha now, and my father wants promotion. Your father is a good man, and I will do what I can for him. At this point, a telegram was handed to Ord, who after glancing at it said he must leave his young friend, whom he introduced to Paget, a member of the English House of Commons, who wishes to learn about India. Ord bad scarcely retired with his telegram when Paget began. Perhaps you can tell me something of the National Congress movement. Sir, it is the greatest movement of modern times, and one in which all educated men like us must join. All our students are for the Congress. Excepting, I suppose, Mohammedans and the Christians, said Paget, quick to use his recent instruction. These are some mere exceptions to the universal rule. But the people outside the college, the working classes, the agriculturists, your father and mother, for instance. My mother said the young man, with a visible effort to bring himself to pronounce the word, has no ideas, and my father is not agriculturist nor working class, he is of the Kayeth caste. But he had not the advantage of a collegiate education, and he does not know much of the Congress. It is a movement for the educated young man, connecting adjective and noun in a sort of vocal hyphen. Ah yes, said Paget, feeling he was a little off the rails. And what are the benefits you expect to gain by it? Oh, sir, everything England owes its greatness to parliamentary institutions, and we should at once gain the same high position in scale of nations. Sir, we wish to have the sciences, the arts, the manufactures, the industrial factories with steam engines, and other motive powers and public meetings and debates already. We have a debating club in connection with the college, and elect a Mr. Speaker, sir, the progress must come. You also are a member of Parliament. And worship the great Lord Ripon, said the youth breathlessly, and his black eyes flashed as he finished his Kamala's sentences. Well, said Paget dryly, it has not yet occurred to me to worship his lordship, although I believe he is a very worthy man, and I am not sure that England owes quite all the things you name to the House of Commons. You see, my young friend, the growth of a nation like ours is slow, subject to many influences. And if you have read your history aright, sir, I know it all Norman Conquest, Magna Charta, Runnymede Reformation, Tudors, Stuarts, Mr. Milton and Mr. Burke, and I have read something of Mr. Herbert Spencer and Gibbon's Decline, and Fall Reynolds' Mysteries of the Court, and Paget felt like one who had pulled the string of a showerbath unawares, and hastened to stop the torrent with a question as to what particular grievances of the people of India the attention of an elected assembly should be first directed. But young Mr. D.M.A. Nath was slow to particularize. There were many, very many demanding consideration. Mr. Paget would like to hear of one or two typical examples. The repeal of the Arms Act was at last named, and the student learned for the first time that a license was necessary before an Englishman could carry a gun in England. Then natives of India ought to be allowed to become volunteer riflemen, if they chose, and the absolute equality of the Oriental with his European fellow subject in civil status should be proclaimed on principle, and the Indian army should be considerably reduced. The student was not, however, prepared with answers to Mr. Paget's mildest questions on these points, and he returned to vague generalities, leaving the Roman 1000p so much impressed with the crudity of his views that he was glad on Ord's return to say goodbye to his very interesting young friend. What do you think of young India? Asked Ord. Curious, very curious, and Cal. And yet the civilian replied, one can scarcely help sympathizing with him for his mere youth's sake. The young orators of the Oxford Union arrived at the same conclusions, and showed doubtless just the same enthusiasm. If there were any political analogy between India and England, if the 1,000 races of this empire were one, if there were any chance even of their learning to speak one language, if in short India were a utopia of the debating room, and not a real land, this kind of talk might be worth listening to, but it is all based on false analogy and ignorance of the facts. But he is a native and knows the facts. He is a sort of English schoolboy, but married 3 years and the father of 2 weaklings, and knows less than most English schoolboys. You saw all he is and knows, and such ideas as he has acquired are directly hostile to the most cherished convictions of the vast majority of the people. But what does he mean by saying he is a student of a mission college? Is he a Christian? He meant just what he said, and he is not a Christian, nor ever will he be. Good people in America, Scotland, and England, most of whom would never dream of collegiate education for their own sons, are pinching themselves to bestow it in pure waste on Indian youths. Their scheme is an oblique subterranean attack on heathenism, the theory being that with the jam of secular education, leading to a university degree, the pill of moral or religious instruction may he coax down the heathen gullet. But does it succeed? Do they make converts? They make no converts, for the subtle Oriental swallows the jam and rejects the pill, but the mere example of the sober, righteous, and godly lives of the principals and professors, who are most excellent and devoted men, must have a certain moral value. Yet, as Lord Lansdowne pointed out the other day, the market is dangerously overstocked with graduates of our universities who look for employment in the administration. An immense number are employed, but year by year, the college mills grind out increasing lists of youths, foredoomed to failure and disappointment, and meanwhile trade manufactures and the industrial arts are neglected, and in fact regarded with contempt by our new literary mandarins in posse. But our young friend said he wanted steam engines and factories, said Paget. Yes, he would like to direct such concerns. He wants to begin at the top, for manual labor is held to be discreditable, and he would never defile his hands by the apprenticeship which the architects, engineers, and manufacturers of England cheerfully undergo, and he would be aghast to learn that the leading names of industrial enterprise in England belonged a generation or two since or now belong to men who wrought with their own hands, and though he talks glibly of manufacturers, he refuses to see that the Indian manufacturer of the future will be the despised workman of the present. It was proposed, for example, a few weeks ago, that a certain municipality in this province should establish an elementary technical school for the sons of workmen. The stress of the opposition to the plan came from a pleader who owed all he had to a college education bestowed on him, gratis by government and missions. You would have fancied some fine old crusted Tory squire of the last generation was speaking. These people, he said, want no education, for they learn their trades from their fathers, and to teach a workman's son the elements of mathematics and physical science would give him ideas above his business. They must be kept in their place. And it was idle to imagine that there was any science in wood or iron work, and he carried his point. But the Indian workman will rise in the social scale, in spite of the new literary caste. In England, we have scarcely begun to realize that there is an industrial class in this country, yet I suppose the example of men like Edwards, for instance, must tell, said Paget thoughtfully. That you shouldn't know much about it is natural enough, for there are but few sources of information. India, in this as in other respects, is like a badly kept ledger not written up to date, and men like Edwards are in reality missionaries, who by precept and example are teaching more lessons than they know. Only a few, however, of their crowds of subordinates seem to care to try to emulate them and aim at individual advancement. The rest drop into the ancient Indian caste groove. How do you mean? Asked he. Well, it is found that the new railway and factory workmen, the fitter, the smith, the engine driver, and the rest, are already forming separate hereditary castes. You may notice this down at Jamalpur in Bengal, one of the oldest railway centers, and at other places, and in other industries, they are following the same inexorable Indian law. Which means, queried Paget. It means that the rooted habit of the people is to gather in small, self-contained, self-sufficing family groups, with no thought or care for any interests, but their own, a habit which is scarcely compatible with the right acceptation of the elective principle. Yet you must admit, Ord, that though our young friend was not able to expound the faith that is in him, your Indian army is too big. Not nearly big enough for its main purpose, and as a side issue there are certain powerful minorities of fighting folk whose interests an Asiatic government is bound to consider. Arms is as much a means of livelihood as civil employ under government and law, and it would be a heavy strain on British bayonets to hold down Sikhs, Jats, Baloches, Rohillas, Rajputs, Bhils, Dogras, Pathans, and Gurkhas to abide by the decisions of a numerical majority, opposed to their interests, leave the numerical majority to itself, without the British bayonets. A flock of sheep might as reasonably hope to manage a troop of collies. This complaint about excessive growth of the army is akin to another contention of the Congress party. They protest against the malversation of the whole of the moneys raised by additional taxes as a famine insurance fund to other purposes. You must be aware that this special famine fund has all been spent on frontier roads and defenses and strategic railway schemes as a protection against Russia. But there was never a special famine fund raised by special taxation and put by as in a box. No sane administrator would dream of such a thing in a time of prosperity. A finance minister, rejoicing in a margin, proposed to annually apply $1.5 million to the construction of railways and canals, for the protection of districts liable to scarcity, and to the reduction of the annual loans for public works. But times were not always prosperous, and the finance minister had to choose whether he would bang up the insurance scheme for a year or impose fresh taxation when a farmer hasn't got the little surplus he hoped to have for buying a new wagon and draining a lowlying field corner. You don't accuse him of malversation if he spends what he has on the necessary work of the rest of his farm. A clatter of hoofs was heard, and Ord looked up with vexation, but his brow cleared as a horseman halted under the porch. Helen, Ord just looked in to ask if you're coming to polo on Tuesday. We want you badly to help to crumple up the Crab Bakbar team. Ord explained that he had to go out into the district, and while the visitor complained that though good men wouldn't play, duffers were always keen, and that his side would probably be beaten, Paget rose to look at his mount, a red-lathered Bylock mare, with a curious lyre-like incurving of the ears, quite a little thoroughbred, in all other respects, said the Roman 1000p, and Ord presented Mr. Reginald Burke, manager of the Syed and Silecote Bank, to his friend. Yes, she's as good as they make 'em, and she's all the female I possess, and spoiled in consequence, aren't you, old girl, said Burke, patting the mare's glossy neck, as she backed and plunged. Mr. Paget, said Ord, has been asking me about the Congress. What is your opinion? Burke turned to the Roman 1000p with a frank smile. Well, if it's all the same to you, sir, I should say damn the Congress. But then I am no politician, but only a businessman. You find it a tiresome subject. Yes, it's all that, and worse than that, for this kind of agitation is anything but wholesome for the country. How do you mean? It would be a long job to explain, and Sarah here won't stand, but you know how sensitive capital is, and how timid investors are. All this sort of rot is likely to frighten them, and we can't afford to frighten them. The passengers aboard an ocean steamer don't feel reassured when the ship's way is stopped, and they hear the workmen's hammers tinkering at the engines down below. The old ark's going on all right as she is, and only wants quiet and room to move. Them's my sentiments, and those of some other people who have to do with money and business. Then you are a thick and thin supporter of the government, as it is. Why no, the Indian government is much too timid with its money, like an old maiden aunt of Minilways, in a funk about her investments. They don't spend half enough on railways, for instance, and they are slow in a general way, and ought to be made to sit up in all that concerns the encouragement of private enterprise, and coaxing out into use the millions of capital that lie dormant in the country. The mayor was dancing with impatience, and Burke was evidently anxious to be off, so the men wished him goodbye. Who is your genial friend, who condemns both Congress and government, in a breath? Asked Paget with an amused smile. Just now he is Reggie Burke, keener on polo than on anything else, but if you go to the Sind and Silecote Bank tomorrow, you would find Mr. Reginald Burke a very capable man of business, known and liked by an immense constituency north and south of this. Do you think he is right about the government's want of enterprise? I should hesitate to say better consult the merchants and chambers of commerce in Cawnpore, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. But though these bodies would like, as Reggie puts it, to make government sit up, it is an elementary consideration in governing a country like India, which must be administered for the benefit of the people at large, that the counsels of those who resort to it for the sake of making money should be judiciously weighed, and not allowed to overpower the rest. They are welcome guests here as a matter of course, but it has been found best to restrain their influence. Thus the rights of plantation laborers, factory operatives, and the like have been protected, and the capitalist eager to get on has not always regarded government action with favor. It is quite conceivable that under an elective system, the commercial communities of the great towns might find means to secure majorities on labor questions and on financial matters. They would act at least with intelligence and consideration. Intelligence, yes, but as to consideration, who at the present moment most bitterly resents the tender solicitude of Lancashire for the welfare and protection of the Indian factory, operative English and native capitalists running cotton mills and factories? But is the solicitude of Lancashire in this matter entirely disinterested? It is no business of mine to say. I merely indicate an example of how a powerful commercial interest might hamper a government intent, in the first place, on the larger interests of humanity. Ord broke off to listen a moment. There's Dr. Lathrop, talking to my wife in the drawing-room, said he. Surely not, that's a lady's voice, and if my ears don't deceive me, an American. Exactly, Dr. Eva McCreary Lathrop, chief of the new women's hospital here, and a very good fellow, for by good morning, doctor, he said, as a graceful figure came out on the veranda. You seem to be in trouble, I hope Mrs. Ord was able to help you. Your wife is real kind and good. I always come to her when I am in a fix, but I fear it's more than comforting I want. You work too hard and wear yourself out, said Ord. Kindly let me introduce my friend Mr. Paget, just fresh from home and anxious to learn his India. You could tell him something of that more important half, of which a mere man knows so little. Perhaps I could if I'd any heart to do it, but I am in trouble. I've lost a case that was doing well through nothing in the world but inattention on the part of a nurse I had begun to trust, and when I spoke only a small piece of my mind, she collapsed in a whining heap on the floor. It is hopeless. The men were silent, for the blue eyes of the lady doctor were Roman 1499 recovering herself. She looked up with a smile half sad, half humorous. And I am in a whining heap too. But what phase of Indian life are you particularly interested in, sir? Mr. Paget intends to study the political aspect of things and the possibility of bestowing electoral institutions on the people. Wouldn't it be as much to the purpose to bestow point-lace collars on them? They need many things more urgently than votes. Why, it's like giving a bread pill for a broken leg. I don't quite follow, said Paget uneasily. Well, what's the matter with this country is not in the least political, but an all-round entanglement of physical, social, and moral evils and corruptions, all more or less due to the unnatural treatment of women. You can't gather figs from thistles. And so long as the system of infant marriage, the prohibition of the remarriage of widows, the lifelong imprisonment of wives and mothers in a worse than penal confinement, and the withholding from them of any kind of education or treatment as rational beings, continues, the country can't advance a step. Half of it is morally dead, and worse than dead. And that's just the half from which we have a right to look for the best impulses. It's right here where the trouble is, and not in any political considerations whatsoever. But do they marry so early, said Paget vaguely. The average age is 7, but thousands are married still earlier. One result is that girls of 12 and 13 have to bear the burden of wifehood and motherhood. And as might be expected, the rate of mortality, both for mothers and children, is terrible. Pauperism, domestic unhappiness, and a low state of health are only a few of the consequences of this. Then, when, as frequently happens, the boy husband dies prematurely, his widow is condemned to worse than death. She may not remarry, must live a secluded and despised life, a life so unnatural that she sometimes prefers suicide. More often, she goes astray. You don't know in England what such words as infant marriage, baby wife, girl mother, and virgin widow mean, but they mean unspeakable horrors here. Well, but the advanced political party here will surely make it their business to advocate social reforms, as well as political ones, said Paget. Very surely they will do no such thing, said the lady doctor, emphatically. I wish I could make you understand why even of the funds devoted to the Marchioness of Dufferin's organization for medical aid to the women of India, it was said in print and in speech that they would be better spent on more college scholarships for men, and in all the advanced parties talk, God forgive them, and in all their programs they carefully avoid all such subjects. They will talk about the protection of the cow, for that's an ancient superstition. They can all understand that, but the protection of the women is a new and dangerous idea. She turned to Paget impulsively. You are a member of the English Parliament. Can you do nothing? The foundations of their life are rotten, utterly and bestially rot. I could tell your wife things that I couldn't tell you. I know the lifeth inner life that belongs to the native, and I know nothing else, and, believe me, you might as well try to grow goldenrod in a mushroom pit as to make anything of a people that are born and reared as the Sethis think, sir. The men talk of their rights and privileges. I have seen the women that bear these very men, and again may God forgive the men. Paget's eyes opened with a large wonder. Dr. Lathrop rose tempestuously. I must be off to lecture, said she, and I am sorry that I can't show you my hospitals, but you had better believe, sir, that it's more necessary for India than all the elections in creation. That's a woman with a mission, and no mistake, said Paget after a pause. Yes, she believes in her work, and so do I, said Ord. I've a notion that in the end it will be found that the most helpful work done for India in this generation was wrought by Lady Dufferin, in drawing attention, what work that was, by the way, even with her husband's great name to back it, to the needs of women here. In effect, native habits and beliefs are an organized conspiracy against the laws of health and happy life, but there is some dawning of hope now. How do you account for the general indifference then? I suppose it's due in part to their fatalism and their utter indifference to all human suffering. How much do you imagine the great province of the Punjab, with over 20 million people and half a score rich towns, has contributed to the maintenance of civil dispensaries? Last year, about 7,000 rupees. That's £700, said Paget quickly. I wish it was, replied Ord, but anyway it's an absurdly inadequate sum, and shows one of the blank sides of Oriental character. Paget was silent for a long time. The question of direct and personal pain did not lie within his researches. He preferred to discuss the weightier matters of the law, and contented himself with murmuring, "They'll do better later on then," with a rush returning to his first thought. But my dear Ord, if it's merely a class movement of a local and temporary character, How do you account for Bradleff, who is at least a man of sense, taking it up? I know nothing of the champion of the new Brahmins, but what I see in the papers, I suppose, there is something tempting in being hailed by a large assemblage as the representative of the aspirations of 250 millions of people. Such a man looks through all the roaring and the wreaths, and does not reflect that it is a false perspective which, as a matter of fact, hides the real complex and manifold India from his gaze. He can scarcely be expected to distinguish between the ambitions of a new oligarchy and the real wants of the people of whom he knows nothing. But it's strange that a professed radical should come to be the chosen advocate of a movement which has for its aim the revival of an ancient tyranny, shows how even radicalism can fall into academic grooves and miss the essential truths of its own creed. Believe me, Paget, to deal with India, you want first-hand knowledge and experience. I wish you would come and live here for a couple of years or so. Is not this rather an ad hominem style of argument? Can't help it in a case like this. Indeed, I am not sure you ought not to go further and weigh the whole character and quality and upbringing of the man. You must admit that the monumental complacency with which he trotted out his ingenious little constitution for India showed a strange want of imagination and the sense of humor. No, I don't quite admit it, said Paget. Well, you know him and I don't, but that's how it strikes a stranger. He turned on his heel and paced the veranda thoughtfully. And after all, the burden of the actual daily unromantic toil falls on the shoulders of the men out here, and not on his own. He enjoys all the privileges of recommendation without responsibility, and we will perhaps, when you've seen a little more of India, you'll understand. To begin with, our death rates 5 times higher than yours. I speak now for the brutal bureaucrat end. We work on the refuse of worked-out cities and exhausted civilizations among the bones of the dead. Paget laughed. That's an epigrammatic way of putting it, Ord. Is it? Let's see, said the deputy commissioner of Amara, striding into the sunshine toward a half-naked gardener potting roses. He took the man's hoe and went to a rain-scarped bank at the bottom of the garden. Come here, Paget, he said, and cut at the sun-baked soil. After 3 strokes there rolled from under the blade of the hoe the half of a clanking skeleton that settled at Paget's feet. In an unseemly jumble of bones, the Roman 1000p drew back. Our houses are built on cemeteries, said Ord. There are scores of thousands of graves within 10 miles. Paget was contemplating the skull with the odd fascination of a man who has but little to do with the dead. India's a very curious place, said he after a pause. I'll know all about it in 3 months. Come in to lunch, said Ord.